Track 18. More scientists do science. In space. Ed reads Sci-fi, Volume 11. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Story 7. Growing Up on Big Muddy by Charles V de VetWell. Kaiser stared at the tape in his hand for a long, uncomprehending minute. How long had the stuff been coming through in this inane baby talk? And why hadn't he noticed it before? Why had he had to read this last communication a third time before he recognized anything unusual about it? He went over the words again, as though maybe this time they'd read as they should. Who is sick, smoky? Do to beddy by. Keep warm. When feels better, let us'ns know. SS2. Kaiser let himself ease back in the pilot chair and rolled the tape thoughtfully between his fingers. Overhead and to each side, large drops of rain thudded softly against the transparent walls of the scout ship and dripped wearily from the bottom edge to the ground. Damn this climate, Kaiser muttered irrelevantly. Doesn't it ever do anything here except rain? His attention returned to the matter at hand. Why the baby talk? And why was his memory so hazy? How long had he been here? What had he been doing during that time? Listlessly he reached for the towel at his elbow and wiped the moisture from his face and bare shoulders. The air conditioning had gone out when the scout ship cracked up. He'd have to repair the scout, or he was stuck here for good. He remembered now that he had gone over the job very carefully and thoroughly, and had found it too big to handle alone, or without better equipment at least. Yet there was little or no chance of his being able to find either here. Calmly, deliberately, Kaiser collected his thoughts, his memories, and brought them out where he could look at them. The mothership, Societas II, had been on the last leg of its planet-mapping tour. It had dropped Kaiser and the one remaining scout ship. The other 7 had all been lost one way or another during the exploring of new worlds, and set itself into a giant orbit around this planet that Kaiser had named Big Muddy. The Societas II had to maintain its constant speed. It had no means of slowing, except to stop, and no way to start again once it did stop. Its limited range of maneuverability made it necessary to set up an orbit that would take it approximately 1 month, Earth time, to circle a pinpointed planet. And now its fuel was low. Kaiser had that 1 month to repair his scout or be stranded here forever. That was all he could remember. Nothing of what he'd been doing recently. A small shiver passed through his body as he glanced once again at the tape in his hand. Baby talk. One thing he could find out: how long this had been going on. He turned to the communicator and unhooked the paper receptacle on its bottom. It held about 1.5 yards of tape, probably his last several messages, both those sent and those received. He pulled it out impatiently and began reading. The first was from himself. Your suggestions, no help. How am I going to repair damage to scout without proper equipment? And where do I get it? Do you think I found a tool ship down here? For God's sake, come up with something better. Visited seal people again today. Still have the stink in my nose. Found huts along riverbank, so I guess they don't live in water. But they do spend most of their time there. No, I have no way of estimating their intelligence. I would judge it averages no higher than 7-year-old human. They definitely do talk to one another. Well, I'll try to find out more about them, but you get to work fast on how I repair scout. Swelling an arm worse, and I'm developing a fever. Temperature 102.7 an hour ago. Smoky. The ship must have answered immediately, for the return message time was 6 hours later than his own, the minimum interval necessary for two-way exchange. Doing our best, Smoky. Your immediate problem, as we see it, is to keep well. We fed all the information you gave us into Sam, but you didn't have much except the sting in your arm. As expected, all that came out was data insufficient. Try to give us more. Also detail all symptoms since your last report. In the meantime, we're doing everything we can at this end. Good luck. Sam, Kaiser knew, was the ship's mechanical diagnostician, whose report followed. Arm swollen, unable to keep down food last 12 hours. About 2 hours ago, entire body turned livid red. Brief periods of blankness, Things keep coming and going. Sick as hell. Hurry. Smoky. The ship's next message read, Infection quite definite, but something strange there. Give us anything more you have. SS2. His own reply perplexed Kaiser. Last letter funny. I not understand. Why is oo sending gobble talk? Does make up secret messages? Smoky. The expedition apparently was as puzzled as he. What's the matter, Smoky? That last message was in plain Terran. No reason why you couldn't read it. And why the baby talk? If you're spoofing, stop. Give us more symptoms. How are you feeling now? SS2. The baby talk was worse on Kaiser's next. Twazi, what for tending twazi letters? Finkum and weed twazi letters? Skin al yellow now, cold curdled. The ship's following communication was 3 hours late. It was the last on the tape, the one Kaiser had read earlier. Apparently they decided to humor him. Ooh, he's sick. Smoky, go to beddy by, keep him warm. When feels better, listens no. SS2. That was not much help. All it told him was that he had been sick. He felt better now, outside of a muscular weariness, as though convalescing from a lung illness. He put the back of his hand to his forehead. Cool. No fever, anyway. He glanced at the clock calendar on the instrument board and back at the date and time on the tape where he'd started his baby talk. 20 hours. He hadn't been out of his head too long. He began punching the communicator keys while he nibbled at a biscuit. Seemed to be fairly recovered, feeling fine. Anything new from Sam? And how about the damage to Scout? Give me anything you have on either or both. Smoky. Kaiser felt suddenly weary. He lay on the Scout's bunk and tried to sleep. Soon he was in that phantasm land between sleep and wakefulness. He knew he was not sleeping, yet he did dream. It was the same dream he had had many times before. In it he was back home again, the home he had joined the space service to escape. He had realized soon after his marriage that his wife Helene did not love him. She had married him for the security his paycheck provided, and though it soon became evident that she too regretted her bargain, she would not divorce him. Instead, she had her revenge on him by persistent nagging, by letting herself grow fat and querulous, and by caring for their health only in a slovenly way. Her crippled brother had moved in with them the day they were married. His mind was as crippled as his body, and he took an unhealthy delight in helping his sister torment Kaiser. Kaiser came wide awake in a cold sweat. The clock showed that only an hour had passed since he had sent his last message to the ship. Still 5 more long hours to wait. He rose and wiped the sweat from his neck and shoulders, and restlessly paced the small corridor of the Scout. After a few minutes he stopped pacing and peered out into the gloom of Big Muddy. The rain seemed to have eased off some. Not much more than a heavy drizzle now. Kaiser reached impulsively for the slicker he had thrown over a chest against one wall and put it on, then a pair of hip-high plastic boots and a plastic hat. He opened the door. The Scout had come to rest with a slight tilt when it crashed, and Kaiser had to sit down and roll over onto his stomach to ease himself to the ground. The weather outside was normal for Big Muddy, wet, humid, and warm. Kaiser sank to his ankles in soft mud before his feet reached solid ground. He half walked and half slid to the rear of the Scout. Beside the ship, the octopus was busily at work. Tentacles and antennae, extending from the yard-high box of its body, tested and recorded temperature, atmosphere, soil, and all other pertinent planetary conditions. The octopus was connected to the ship's communicator, and all its findings are being transmitted to the mothership for study. Kaiser observed that it was working well, and turned toward a wide, sluggish river, perhaps 200 yards from the Scout. Once there, he headed upstream. He could hear the pipings, and now and then a higher whistling, of the seal people before he reached a bend and saw them. As usual, most were swimming in the river. One old fellow, whose chocolate-brown fur showed a heavy intermixture of grey, was sitting on the bank of the river just at the bend, perhaps a lookout. He pulled himself to his feet as he spied Kaiser, and his toothless, hard-gummed mouth opened and emitted a long whistle that might have been a greeting, or a warning to the others that a stranger approached. The native stood perhaps 5 feet tall, with the heavy, blubbery body of a seal and short, thick arms. Membranes connected the arms to his body from shoulder pits to mid-biceps. The arms ended in 3-fingered, thumbless hands. His legs also were short and thick, with footpads that splayed out at 45-degree angles. They gave his legs the appearance of a split tail. About him hung a rank fish smell that made Kaiser's stomach squirm. The old fellow sounded a cheerful chirp as Kaiser came near. Feeling slightly ineffectual, Kaiser raised both hands and held them palm forward. The other chirped again, and Kaiser went on toward the main group. They had stopped their play and eating as Kaiser approached, and now most of them swam in to shore and stood in the water, staring and piping. They varied in size from small seal pups to full-grown adults. Some chewed on bunches of waterweed, which they manipulated with their lips and drew into their mouths. They had mammalian characteristics, Kaiser had noted before, so it was not difficult to distinguish the females from the males. The proportion was roughly 50-50. Several of the bolder males climbed up beside Kaiser and began pouring his plastic clothing. Kaiser stood still and tried to keep his breathing shallow, for their odor was almost more than he could bear. One native smeared Kaiser's face with an exploring paw, and Kaiser gagged and pushed him roughly away. He was bound by regulations to display no hostility to newly discovered natives, but he couldn't take much more of this. A young female splashed water on two young males who stood near, and they turned with shrill pipings and chased her into the water. The entire group seemed to lose interest in Kaiser and joined in the chase, or went back to other diversions of their own. Kaiser's inspectors followed. "They're a reminders lot," Kaiser observed. The river supplied them with an easy existence, with food and living space, and apparently they had few natural enemies. Kaiser walked away, following the long, slow bend of the river, and came to a collection of perhaps 200 dwellings built in 3 haphazard rows along the riverbank. He took time to study the construction more closely this time. They were all round domes, little more than the height of a man, built of blocks that appeared to be mud, packed with riverweed and sand. How they were able to dry these to give them the necessary solidity, Kaiser did not know. He had found no signs that they knew how to use fire, and all apparent evidence was against their having it. They then had to have sunlight. Maybe it rained less during certain seasons. The dome's construction was based on a series of 4 arches built in a circle. When the base covering the periphery had been laid, 4 others were built on and between them, and continued in successive tiers until the top was reached. Each tier thus furnished support for the next above. No other framework was needed. The final tier formed the roof. They made sound shelters, but Kaiser had peered into several and found them dark and dank, and as smelly as the natives themselves. The few loungers in the village paid little attention to Kaiser, and he wandered through the irregular streets until he became bored and returned to the scout. The Societas, too, sent little that helped during the next 12 hours, and Kaiser occupied his time trying again to repair the damage to the scout. The job appeared maddeningly simple. As the scout had glided in for a soft landing, its metal button had ridden a concealed rock and bent inward. The bent metal had carried up with it the tube supplying the fuel pump and flattened it against the motor casing. Opening the tube again would not have been difficult, but first it had to be freed from under the ship. Kaiser had tried forcing the sheet metal back into place with a small crowbar, the best leverage he had on hand, but it resisted his best efforts. He still could think of no way to do the job, simple as it was, though he gave his concentration to it the rest of the day. That evening Kaiser received information from the Societas too that was at least definite. "Set yourself for a shock, Smokey. Sam finally came through. You won't like what you hear, at least not at first, but it could be worse. You have been invaded by a symbiote, similar to the type found on the Sand World, Bartol Blethers. Give us a few more hours to work with Sam, and we'll get you all of the particulars he can give us. Hang on now, Societas 2. Kaiser's reply was short and succinct. "What the hell?" Smokey. Societas 2's next communication followed within 20 minutes, and was signed by the ship's doctor. "Just a few words, Smokey, in case you were worried. I thought I'd get this off while we're waiting for more information from Sam. Remember that a symbiote is not a parasite. It will not harm you, except inadvertently. Your welfare is essential to it as to you. Almost certainly, if you die, it will die with you. Any trouble you've had so far was probably caused by the symbiote's difficulty in adjusting itself to its new environment. In a way I envy you. More later, when we finish with Sam. J.G. Zarwell. Kaiser did not answer. The news was so startling, so unforeseen, that his mind refused to accept the actuality. He lay on the scout's bunk and stared at the ceiling without conscious attention, and with very little clear thought, for several hours, until the next communication came in. "Well, this is what Sam has to say, Smokey. Symbiote amicable and apparently swiftly adaptable. Your changing color, difficulty in eating, and even baby talk were the result of its efforts to give you what it believed you needed or wanted. Changing color. Protective camouflage. Trouble keeping food down. It kept your stomach empty because it sensed you were in trouble and might have need for sharp reflexes, with no excess weight to carry. The baby talk we aren't too certain about, but our best conclusion is that when you were a child, you were most happy. It was trying to give you back that happy state of mind. Obviously, it quickly recognized the mistakes it made and corrected them. Sam came up with a few more ideas, but we want to work on them a bit before we send them through. Sleep on this. SS2. Kaiser can imagine that most of the crew were not too concerned about the trouble he was in. He was not the gregarious type and had no close friends on board. He had hoped to find the solitude he liked best in space, but he had been disappointed. True, there were fewer people here, but he was brought into such intimate contact with them that he would have been more contented living in a crowded city. His naturally unsociable nature was more irksome to the crew because he was more intelligent and efficient than they were. He did his work well and painstakingly and was seldom in error. They would have liked him better had he been more prone to mistakes. He was certain that they respected him, but they did not like him, and he returned the dislike. The suggestion that he get some sleep might not be a bad idea. He hadn't slept in over 18 hours, Kaiser realized, and fell instantly asleep. The communicator had a message waiting for him when he awoke. Sam couldn't help us much on this part, but after research and much discussion, we arrived at the following two conclusions. First, physical property of symbiote is either that of a very thin liquid or, more probably, a virus form with swift propagation characteristic. It undoubtedly lives in your bloodstream and permeates your system. Second, it seemed to us, as it must have to you, that the symbiote could only know what you wanted by reading your mind. However, we believe differently now. We think that it has such close contact with your glands and the secretions, which stimulate emotion, that it can gauge your feelings even more accurately than you yourself can. Thus it can judge your likes and dislikes quite accurately. We would like to have you test our theory. There are dozens of ways. If you're stumped and need suggestions, just let us know. We await word from you with great interest. SS2. By now Kaiser had accepted what had happened to him. His distress and anxiety were gone, and he was impatient to do what he could to establish better contact with his uninvited tenant. With eager anticipation, he set to thinking how it could be done. After a few minutes, an idea occurred to him. Taking a small scalpel from a medical kit, he made a shallow cut in his arm, just deep enough to bleed freely. He knew that the pain would supply the necessary glandular reaction. The cut bled a few slow drops, and as Kaiser watched, a shiny film formed and the bleeding stopped. That checked pretty well with the ship's theory. Perhaps the symbiote had made his senses more acute. He tried closing his eyes and fingering several objects in the room. It seemed to him that he could determine the texture of each better than before, but the test was inconclusive. Walking to the rear of the Scout, he tried reading the printed words on the instrument panel. Each letter stood out sharp and clear. Kaiser wondered if he might not make an immediate, practical use of the symbiote's apparent desire to help him. Concentrating on the discomfort of the high humidity and exaggerating his own displeasure with it, he waited. The result surprised and pleased him. The temperature within the Scout cabin seemed to lower, the moisture on his body vanished, and he was more comfortable than he had yet been here. As a double check, he looked at the ship's thermometer. Temperature 102, humidity 113, just about the same as it had been on earlier readings. During the next 24 hours, Kaiser and the mothership exchanged messages at regular 6-hour intervals. In between, he worked at repairing the damaged Scout. He had no more success than before. He tired easily and lay on the cot often to rest. Each time he seemed to drop off to sleep immediately, and awake at the exact times he decided on beforehand. At first, despite the lack of success in straightening the bent metal of the scout bottom, there had been a subdued exhilaration in reporting each new discovery concerning the symbiote, but as time passed, his enthusiasm ebbed. His one really important problem was how to repair the scout, and he was fast becoming discouraged. At last, Kaiser could bear the futility of his efforts no longer. He sent out a terse message to the Societas II. Taking short trip to another location on river. Hope to find more intelligent natives. Could be that the settlement I found here is analogous to tribe of monkeys on Earth. I know the chance is small, but what have I to lose? I can't fix Scout without better tools, and if my guess is right, I may be able to get equipment. Expect to return in 10 or 12 hours. Please keep contact with Scout. Smokey. Kaiser packed a mudsled with tent, portable generator and guard wires, a spare sidearm and ammunition, and food for 2 days. He had noticed that a range of high hills, which caused the bend in the river at the native settlement, seemed to continue its long curve, and he wondered if the hills might not turn the river in the shape of a giant horseshoe. He intended to find out. Wrapping his equipment in a plastic tarp, Kaiser eased it out of the doorway and tied it on the sled. He hooked a tow line to a harness on his shoulders and began his journey, in the opposite direction from the first native settlement. He walked for more than 7 hours before he found that his surmise had been correct, and a second cluster of huts and seal people in the river greeted his sight. He received a further pleasant surprise. This group was decidedly more advanced than the first. They were little different in actual physical appearance. The change was mainly noticeable in their actions and demeanor, and their odor was more subdued, less repugnant. By signs, Kaiser indicated that he came in peace, and they seemed to understand. A thick-bodied male went solemnly to the riverbank and called to a second, who dived and brought up a mouthful of weed. The first male took the weed and brought it to Kaiser. This was obviously a gesture of friendship. The weed had a white, starchy core and looked edible. Kaiser cleaned part of it with his handkerchief, bit, and chewed it. The weed had a slight iron taste, but was not unpalatable. He swallowed the mouthful and tried another. He ate most of what had been given him, and waited with some trepidation for a reaction. As dusk fell, Kaiser set up his tent a few 100 yards back from the native settlement. All apprehension about how his stomach would react to the river weed had left him. Apparently it could be assimilated by his digestive system. Lying on his air mattress, he felt thoroughly at peace with this world. Once, just before dropping off to sleep, he heard the snuffling noise of some large animal outside his tent, and picked up a pistol, just in case. However, the first jolt of the guard wire charge discouraged the beast, and Kaiser heard it shuffle away, making puzzled mewing sounds as it went. The next morning, Kaiser left off all his clothes, except a pair of shorts, and went swimming in the river. The seal people were already in the water when he arrived, and were very friendly. That friendliness nearly resulted in disaster. The natives crowded around as he swam. They maneuvered with an otter-like proficiency, and often nudged him with their bodies when they came too close. He had difficulty keeping afloat, and soon turned and started back. As he neared the river edge, a playful female grabbed him by the ankle and pulled him under. Kaiser tried to break her hold, but she evidently thought he was clowning, and wrapped her warm furred arms around him and held him helpless. They sank deeper. When his breath threatened to burst from his lungs in a stream of bubbles, and he still could not free himself, Kaiser brought his knee up into her stomach, and her grip loosened abruptly. He reached the surface, choking and coughing, and swam blindly toward shore until his feet hit the river bottom. As he stood on the bank, getting his breath, the natives were quiet and seemed to be looking at him reproachfully. He stood for a time, trying to think of a way to explain the necessity of what he had done, but there was none. He shrugged helplessly. There was no longer anything to be gained by staying here. If they had the tools he needed, he had no way of finding out or asking for them, and he packed and started back to the Scout. Kaiser's good spirits returned on his return journey. He had enjoyed the relief from the tedium of spending day after day in the Scout, and now he enjoyed the exercise of pulling the mudsled. Above the waist he wore only the harness, and the large, soft drops of rain against his bare skin were pleasant to feel. When he reached the Scout, Kaiser began to unload the sled. The tarpaulin caught on the edge of a runner, and he gave it a tug to free it. To his amazement, The heavy sled turned completely over, spilling the equipment to the ground. Perplexed, Kaiser stooped and began replacing the spilled articles in the tarp. They felt exceptionally light. He paused again, and suddenly his eyes widened. Moving quickly to the door of the Scout, he shoved his equipment through and crawled in behind it. He did not consult the communicator, as he customarily did on entering, but went directly to the warped place on the floor and picked up the crowbar he had laid there. Inserting the bar between the metal of the Scout bottom and the engine casing, he lifted. Nothing happened. He rested a minute and tried again, this time concentrating on his desire to raise the bar. The metal beneath yielded slightly, but he felt the palms of his hands bruise against the lever. Only after he dropped the bar did he realize the force he had exerted. His hands ached and tingled. His strength must have been increased tremendously. With his plastic coat wrapped around the lever, he tried again. The metal of the Scout bottom gave slowly, until the fuel pump hung free. Kaiser did not repair the tube immediately. He let the solution rest in his hands, like a package to be opened, the pleasure of its anticipation to be enjoyed as much as the final act. He transmitted the news of what he had been able to do and sat down to read the 2 messages waiting for him. The first was quite routine. Reports from the octopus indicate that Big Muddy undergoes radical weather cycle changes during spring and fall seasons, from extreme moisture to extreme aridity at height of dry season. Planet must be completely devoid of surface liquid. To survive these unusual extremes, seal people would need extreme adaptability. This verifies our earlier guess that natives have symbiosis with the same virus form that invaded you. With symbiote's aid, such radical physical change could be possible. We'll keep you informed. Give us any new information you might have on natives. SS2. The second report was not so routine. Kaiser thought he detected a note of uneasiness in it. Suggest you devote all time and effort to repair of Scout. Information on seal people adequate for our purposes. SS2. Kaiser did not answer either communication. His earlier report had covered all that he had learned lately. He lay on his cot and went to sleep. In the morning another message was waiting. Very pleased to hear of progress in repair of Scout. Complete as quickly as possible and return here immediately. SS2. Kaiser wondered about the abrupt recall. Could the Societas too be experiencing some difficulty? He struggled the thought aside. If they were, they would have told him. The last notes had more than just a suggestion of urgency. There appeared to be deliberate concealing of information. Strangely, the messages indicated need for haste did not prod Kaiser. He knew now that the job could be done, perhaps in a few hours' time, and the Societas too would not complete its orbit of the planet for 2 weeks yet. Without putting on more than the shirt and trousers he had grown used to wearing, Kaiser went outside and wandered listlessly about the vicinity of the ship for several hours. When he became hungry, he went back inside. Another message came in as he finished eating. This one was from the captain himself. Why have we received no verification of last instructions? Repair Scout immediately and return without further delay. This is an order. H.A. Hesse, Captain. Kaiser pushed the last of his meal, which he had been eating with his fingers, into his mouth, crumpled the tape, wiped the grease from his hands with it, and dropped it to the floor. He pondered mildly as he packed his equipment why he was disregarding the captain's message. For some reason it seemed too trivial for serious consideration. He placated his slightly uneasy conscience only to the extent of packing the communicator in with his other equipment. It was a self-contained unit, and he'd be able to receive messages from the ship on his trip. The tracks of his earlier journey had been erased by the soft rain, and when Kaiser reached the river, he found that he had not returned to the village he had visited the day before. However, there were other seal people here, and they were almost human. The resemblance was still not so much in their physical makeup. That was little changed from the first he had found, as in their obviously greater intelligence. This was mainly noticeable in their facile expressions as they talked. Kaiser was even certain that he read smiles in their faces when he slipped on a particularly slick mud patch as he hurried toward them. Where the members of the first tribes had all looked almost exactly alike, these had been very marked individual characteristics. Also, these had no odor, only a mild, rather pleasing scent. When they came to meet him, Kaiser could detect distinct syllabalism in their pipings. Most of the natives returned to the river after the first 10 minutes of curious inspection, but 2 stayed behind as Kaiser set up his tent. One was a female. They made small noises while he went about his work. After the time he understood that they were trying to give names to his paraphernalia. He tried saying tent and wire and tarp as he handled each object, but their piping voices could not repeat the words. Kaiser amused himself by trying to imitate their sounds for the articles. He was fairly successful. He was certain that he could soon learn enough to carry on a limited conversation. The male became bored after a time and left, but the girl stayed until Kaiser finished. She motioned to him then to follow. When they reached the river bank, he saw that she wanted him to go into the water. Before he had time to decide, Kaiser heard the small bell of the communicator from the tent behind him. He stood undecided for a moment, then returned and read the message on the tape. "Still anxiously awaiting word from you. In the meantime, give very close attention to following. We know that the symbiotes must be able to make radical changes in the physiology of the seal people. There is every probability that yours will attempt to do the same to you, to better fit your body to its present environment. The danger which we hesitated to mention until now, when you have forced us by your obstinate silence, is that it can alter your mind also. Your report on Second Tribe of Seal People strongly indicates that this is already happening. They were probably not more intelligent and human-like than the others. On the contrary, you are becoming more like them. Danger acute. Return immediately. Repeat, immediately. SS2. Kaiser picked up a large rock and slowly, methodically, pounded the communicator into a flattened jumble of metal and loose parts. When he finished, he returned to the waiting girl on the river bank. She pointed at his plastic trousers and made laughing sounds in her throat. Kaiser returned the laugh and stripped off the trousers. They ran, still laughing, into the water. Already the long pink hair that had been growing on his body during the past week was beginning to turn brown at the roots. End of Track 18. Track 19.
More scientists do science. In space.
Ed reads Sci-fi, Volume 11. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Story 8. John Holder's Weapon by Robert Moore Williams. "Get the hell out of my sight, Knocker!" Holder shouted. The scientist had held his temper ever since he had been taken captive. This had set up such a condition of strain within him that even in his dreams he had seen himself destroying Reds. He had blown them up with hydrogen bombs. He had destroyed them with death rays. He had disintegrated them with weapons that no other mind had ever imagined. Most of all, he had hated the poking, prying political commissars who had breathed down his neck in every experiment he had ever attempted, or had watched from the TV camera installed in every laboratory of the vast installation to make certain that any discovery that was made went to the right place. But even Holder's most fantastic dreams were nothing in comparison to what actually happened. Knocker was a big man, standing 6 feet 2 inches tall. There was Cossack blood in him, which gave him a vast feeling of superiority for all men not of his race. This was particularly true of the captive scientists being held prisoner in this secret Ural stronghold. In spite of the fact that every one of them had a better brain than he had, the political commissar looked down upon them as being creatures of an inferior race. As Holder shouted at the commissar, Knocker lost his expression of superiority. His face turned a dim shade of blue, then a thin shade of white. Then, clothes and all, he vanished. Knocker went like smoke before the wind, roiling and turning. When he vanished, he left a vague outline of a human body behind him, which looked like a hole in space, like a ghost outlined against a grey sky. Then this vanished, too. Of Knocker's bulk, not even a wisp was left. John Holder was aware of thundering elation somewhere deep down inside of him. There was horror, too, but the elation was greater. He stared at the empty spot where the commissar had been standing a moment before. Sounds came from his lips, but he had no conscious knowledge that he was uttering them. They were noises that had existed long before language had come into being. Their meaning was pure horror. As they came from his lips, Holder felt every muscle in his stomach begin to tighten into a knot. There was absolutely no question in his mind that he was responsible for Naka's disappearance. Out of his dreams, out of his hate for the commissars and all they represented, this ability had been created. 1,000,000 to 1 chance had come true. This ability was something he did inside himself. It needed no outside equipment to function, no generators to feed energy to it, no crystals to control its frequency. It was its own generator and its own frequency control, and it was all in his own mind. It was new. It was totally different from anything any scientist had ever envisioned before. In this moment, staring at the spot where Naka had been, John Holder felt as if the concrete floor on which he was standing had no more real substance to it than empty space. All that existed was mind, energy, and the dance of the atoms. He also knew that everything he had thought he had known about science was drivel, the mouthings of an idiot, the string of degrees after his name, which had so impressed the Red and had led to his capture by a nation hungry for scientists and willing to go to any lengths to get them, became meaningless, fodder for the amazement of fools. The only important reality in the universe was mind. Everything else was subservient to this reality. Mind was flooding through him now as glowing shafts of light.
"Mocker?"
the loudspeaker in the ceiling rasped. A sound jarred John Holder back to his surroundings. He turned, startled eyes upward. From the ceiling, the bland eye of the television camera regarded him in silent accusation. He swore beneath his breath. How much had they seen? The television system, which spied in every nook and corner of the huge installation, had been Naka's idea, his way of making absolutely certain that he knew everything that was going on among the captive scientists working here. The security police had felt that the TV system was a fine idea. There was no way of predicting what a scientist might discover, or when he would find it out. Perhaps it'd be a new weapon that would enable them to conquer the world. This was what scientists were for. This was the reason the whole vast institute existed here, in secret.
"Knocker?"
the loudspeaker inquired again. He went that way, Holder said quickly, pointing toward an open door. The loudspeaker went silent. Holder hastily turned his attention back to the lab table, where an experiment was in progress. His head was awhirl. It seemed to him that the whole center of his cranium was a ball of light. He knew beyond a doubt that this correlated with his ability to disintegrate Naka. The next problem would be to test the process, in secret, and discover its limits, if any. Did it have any limits? The body, flesh, bone, blood, had gone, like that. He went from the table to his desk. With the knowledge that the TV camera was watching every move he made, he pretended to be busy studying a sheaf of reports on the experiment in progress. From the back of his desk, a photograph with 3 smiling faces looked at him, Marie and Johnny and Teresa, his wife and their 2 kids. They were here too, in his apartment, hostages for his good behavior and for his efficient performance. The 3 faces in the photograph were the biggest reason why he hated Naka, and all of Naka's kind, and all that Naka had stood for. They had been vacationing in the Swiss Alps 2 years before, when all 4 had been kidnapped. It had been as simple as that. An American scientist and his family had vanished from Switzerland. Presumably they'd been taken behind the Iron Curtain, but no one in America knew this for certain. Nor would anyone in the Western world have been able to do anything about it if they had known the facts. Holder assumed that a search had been made for him. Possibly a protest had been lodged with the Russian government. If so, like so many other protests, it had come to nothing. Power was all that was respected in this part of the world. He grinned to himself. Since power was all they respected, he would show them some. He looked up. An armed guard, one of the hated security police, had entered the room.
"The Commandant orders your presence,"
the guard said. "Tell the Commandant to go to—" Holder caught his tongue in the nick of time. He forced a polite smile to his face. "I will be glad to call on the Commandant."
"At once,"
the guard said. "Certainly," Holder said, rising. With a farewell glance at the framed photograph on his desk, the scientist left the lab. Why was he breathing so heavily? The commandant was a big man with a bald head and arm muscles that made bulges in the sleeves of his uniform. An ex-spy. To a man, the scientists here in this installation hated him. He sat behind a plain oak desk and played with a Turkish dagger that he used as a paper knife. Rumour had it that in the days when he had acted as an executioner, he had used this knife to slit the throats of his victims. He did not bother to be polite to a mere scientist. They were dogs to be used for the benefit of the state.
"You were the last one to see Knocker," the commandant said.
"The last one to see him?" Holder questioned. "I do not understand. Is he dead?"
"I will ask the questions. You will answer them," the commandant stated. "What happened to Knocker?"
He was so sure of his power that he did not bother to play his usual game of cat and mouse. "I do not know that anything happened to him," Holder answered quickly. "He was in my lab talking. Then he went away."
"How did he go away?"
The scientist shrugged. "I didn't really notice. We chatted for a few moments. Then I turned my attention again to my work. When I looked up, he was gone. I get the impression from your questions that something is wrong. May I ask?"
"You may not. I will do the asking. What did you do to Knocker?"
"Nothing," Holder promptly answered.
"I saw you do it."
The commandant pointed to the television screen on his desk. "You saw me do what?" Holder said. Anger was rising in him. Again he had the impression that the inside of his head was filling with light.
"I saw you destroy him with the new discovery you have made."
A wolfish grin appeared on the commandant's face, and he looked like a red who has just found a way to achieve his heart's desire of swallowing the world. Holder saw what was happening. The commandant harbored a secret desire to be a ruler. Another Mussolini. Another Stalin. If the commandant could win possession of the discovery he thought Holder had made, he might become another Genghis Khan, to scourge the world with flame and death. "You're utterly crazy," Holder shouted.
"You have discovered the disintegrating ray, and I want it,"
the commandant continued, as if he had not heard a word the scientist had said.
"I'm also going to get it."
He flicked a button and motioned Holder to look at the TV screen. Revealed there were Marie and Johnny and Teresa. The kids were playing their eternal game of hide-and-seek, and were waiting for him to return home to play it with them. At the sight, Holder felt his heart turn over inside him. "You wouldn't harm them," he whispered. "You wouldn't dare." The commandant now looked like a red who had just swallowed the whole solar system. "Wouldn't I?" he answered. The wolf grin on his face had spread from ear to ear. "Get the hell out of my sight!" Holder shouted. The last he saw of the commandant, as the latter went away, was the wolfish grin. There was a startled expression on the grin, as the man vanished like something had happened. It was not on schedule. Holder walked quietly out of the room and down the corridor. Behind him he heard an alarm bell go off. The pound of heavy boots answering the alarm bell followed. He moved faster. A shout to halt followed. He dodged around a corner in a corridor and began to run. He knew now that he would be followed to the ends of the earth. For him, and those dear to him, there was no hiding place. His conversation with the commandant had been monitored. Now that the commandant was gone, the next in command automatically stepped into his shoes. He knew what he was going to do, what he had to do. Perhaps, the vague hope was in his mind, if he could disintegrate bodies, he could also reintegrate them. He did not know if he could do this, and there was no time to find out. There was only time to act and hope. Feet pounded behind him along the corridor. On the roof of the building a siren began to wail. All security forces were being called out. He slipped from the building, dodged around a concrete statue, and ran as fast as his legs could carry him toward the living quarters provided here. This was a 3-story concrete structure. As he slid into the entrance of the building, whistles were shrilling behind him, and armored car motors were beginning to roar. The air was still vibrating with the shrill screaming of the alarm siren. A guard had sighted him and was in hot chase behind. With the feet of the guard clumping behind him, John Holder ran down the 3rd-floor hall toward his apartment. A shot rang out behind him, and the bullet chipped plaster from the wall at the end of the corridor. A hoarse shout to halt sounded. He snatched open the door and was inside. His wife, Her face a question mark, came toward him. Panting, he leaned against the wall. With one hand, he shut the latch on the door. "I thought I heard a shout," Marie said. He nodded. Her face lost all its color. "Then it's come." Each had secretly wondered what would happen when the inevitable hour came when Holder's work was no longer satisfactory. They could not be returned to Switzerland. They knew too much. Would it be Siberia? Or a quick death? What would happen to the children? Again, Holder nodded. "Daddy! Daddy's home!" This was 6-year-old Johnny shouting the good news to Teresa. The boy came running to throw himself toward his father. Holder stooped and picked him up. "You're going to play games with us tonight?" Johnny demanded. "You're going to play hide-and-seek?" "Your father is very tired right now, dear," Marie said quickly. "Later he will play with you." "Sure," Holder said. "Sure. Later." He made no effort to release the boy. 4-year-old Teresa, carrying her teddy bear, was also making a beeline for him. She did not intend to be left out of the fun. Holder caught her up in his free arm. Hobnailed boots pounded to a halt outside the door. A heavy knock sounded. Marie turned toward the door. Holder shook his head. Down the corridor a command rasped out. Abruptly the knocking ceased. "Let him break it down," Holder said. "That will give me enough time." He ignored the questions on his wife's face. "Somebody want in, Daddy?" Johnny inquired. "Who is it?" "The big bad bear," Holder answered. "But don't worry, he won't get you. I won't let him." To Marie he said, "Look out the window and tell me what you see." "An armored car just pulled up in front," she said. "They have set up machine guns on each corner of the B block." "The devils," Holder commented. "What's a devil, Daddy?" Johnny asked. "It's just a word," Holder answered. Marie moved across the room to him. "John," she said, then again. "John." "Don't be alarmed, darling," Holder said. "It's only death." "It's only—" She sat down so quickly that he thought her legs had given way beneath her. "That's only a word, too," Holder said quickly. It... Her lips twisted and a choking movement started in her throat. "How can you say it's only a word, when it's the most real fact in our existence right now?" "Is death a fact, or is it another human delusion?" the scientist asked. "John!" Her eyes were fixed on him with terrible intensity. "I'm not nuts," he said. "The men outside setting up the machine guns are the ones who are crazy, not me." Deep inside, he was quite sure he meant what he had said. "What are they going to do with the guns, Daddy?" Johnny asked. "Guns, Daddy?" Teresa echoed. "They're going to use them to make loud noises," Holder answered. "If I try to run, they will point them at me and make loud noises, and I will fall down." "And go boom?" Teresa asked. She thought this was amusing. Johnny suddenly sensed the seriousness of the situation. "I don't want you to fall down, Daddy," he said. "That's the kind of world we live in," Holder answered. "Sooner or later, everybody has to fall down. There's a law." "John," Marie spoke. "Which do you want?" Holder answered. "If I fall down, I'll never get up. Do you want to spend the rest of your life in this kind of a world where you'll become the plaything of barracks soldiers? Do you want—" "John! Do you want the kids to be raised as wards of the state, where they'll be conditioned into accepting the idea that this world is right?" Holder gestured toward the windows. Marie's face revealed mute agony. "No, but isn't there some other way?" "Sure," the scientist said. He set the kids on the floor. Marie's face gleamed with sudden hope like a rainbow seen at the world's end. A knock sounded on the door. The rainbow vanished from her face. She looked toward the door. "Get the hell out of my sight," Holder said to her. She went as Knocker and the Commandant had gone, except that she went smiling. Her smile seemed to linger in the air like a bright gleam from some far-off heaven after she had gone. "Where Mummy go?" Teresa inquired. "Yeah, where'd she go?" Johnny added. "She was sitting right there just a minute ago."
"We will break down the door if you don't open up,"
a voice said outside. "Just a minute," Holder yelled. He looked at his son. Why was it so difficult to concentrate now? "Johnny," he said. His voice was a hoarse gasp. "Yes, Dad?" "Get the hell out of my sight." The boy went easily and rapidly. Johnny did not seem to mind. It was as if to him there was nothing bad about this experience, possibly nothing new. Holder wiped sweat from his face. Was he sure? Did he really know what he was doing? Was he certain? There had been no time for testing. Teresa, staring round the room, was searching for her idol. "Johnny!" she called. When there was no answer, she looked up at her father and announced, "Johnny is hiding." This was the beginning of a game. Holder forced a smile to his face. "Do you want to go find him?" She clapped her hands in joy. "Sure. Find Johnny." Why was this tick in his right cheek, and this sudden tremor in his hands? Did this child with the bright blue eyes mean so much to him that he could not send her after her mother and brother, that he could not protect her from the men on the other side of the door? Why this sudden sweat all over his body? "Get—" His voice faltered into silence. A knot as big as his fist was in his throat. "Find Johnny, Daddy," Teresa urged. Bang! The butt of a rifle crashed against the door, giving Holder the strength that he needed. "Get the hell out of my sight," he said. She went even easier than Johnny had gone, as if the younger they were, the easier this process was. She went laughing and giggling. She was going to find Johnny. This was a game of hide-and-seek, which she had always enjoyed. Holder tried to swallow the knot in his throat. He moved to the mirror, stood regarding himself in it. Why was his heart pounding so heavily? He, of all men on earth, knew and could prove that the human body was only a mental construction, that the very atoms in it were held together by the force of a patterned idea, and by nothing else. The pattern on which the body was constructed, the blueprint for the bones, flesh, and organs, this was an idea, and nothing more. The flesh and bones, the blood and sinew, that gave reality to the idea, were in reality only the bricks and mortar, the lumber and metal, that gave reality to an architect's blueprint of a house. When the house burned down or was otherwise destroyed, the idea still remained. It, and it alone, had life. It, and it alone, had immortality. Why was sweat spurting from every pore in his body? Crash! Behind him the door fell inward. "Get the hell out of my sight," he said, staring at his reflection in the mirror. Nothing happened. The mirror clearly revealed the puzzled frown on his face, and the look of bewilderment in his eyes. It also revealed 3 men approaching from behind. Holder knew he had failed. He had thought that all he would need to do would be to look at himself in a mirror and go with the others. Something had gone wrong. "I was only sending them ahead of me," he whispered. "I meant to go too." The agony inside him was as deep as space. He made no effort to resist the men when they grabbed him. They took him directly to the deepest underground cell in the headquarters building. He had heard whispered rumors of this place from the other scientists here, but he had never really believed it existed. They chained him to the wall so that his feet did not touch the floor. He looked at the chains and wondered if they would go away when he told them to. A little man with the face of a rat re-entered the cell and the others withdrew. Ratface was the interrogator. Obviously, Ratface had had vast experience with political prisoners. He knew all the questions to ask and all the torture methods. Holder dimly wondered what tales the walls of this tiny, barren cell could tell if they had the ability to speak. "Where is Knocker?" "In hell, I hope." "Ah, I did it," Holder said. "I confess everything. I destroyed Knocker. I eliminated the Commandant. All I ask is that you shoot me at once." The rat face revealed mixed pleasure and chagrin. Prisoners were supposed to confess, but not so quickly. Ratface felt cheated. He enjoyed torturing the helpless.
What about your wife? Did you destroy her too? Yes, and your children?
Yes. Ratface counted on nicotine-stained fingers.
That makes you 5 times a killer.
Yes, shoot me, Holder begged. The agony inside him was growing deeper. Visions of Teresa going away danced before his eyes. What had he actually done to her?
What did you do with the bodies? You have admitted you killed them. You must have hid the bodies someplace.
Ratface had not been properly briefed by the new commandant. He thought he was dealing with murder. Holder glanced up at the ceiling. The TV camera and the microphone were there. Probably the new commandant was watching the scene from some safe place.
Where did you hide the bodies?
Ratface continued. Try and find them. The laughter that followed was wild, and Holden knew it. This fact didn't matter. The political commissars thought all scientists were crazy anyhow, except when they made atom bombs. To a political commissar, atom bombs made sense. They could be dropped on the heads of people who didn't agree with them.
How did you do it?
Ratface demanded. His little beady eyes bored into Holder as he asked this question. Like this, Holder answered. Get the hell out of my sight. His laughter continued for minutes at the funny expression on the little political commissar's face as Ratface had gone away. No one else came into the cell. Holder concentrated his attention on his chains. He repeated the magic formula. The chains remained as firm as ever. He stared at them in growing fear. Here was one thing that did not obey his command to vanish. I only had time to test, he muttered. He tried to pull himself free from the chains. They had been designed and built to prevent exactly this. He exhausted himself with no result, then left off his efforts when he realized he was hearing the sound of running water. His feet were wet. He looked down and saw that the bottom of his cell was covered by water. A pipe broke somewhere, he thought. Looking up toward the TV camera on the ceiling, he yelled, Hey, you'd better repair that pipe before you drown one of your prisoners. There was no question in his mind as to what lay ahead for him. He would be questioned for days, for weeks, if necessary, until they'd gotten his secret from him. The new commandant and the powers above him would use up any number of political commissars to achieve their goal. Political commissars were cheap. Secrets such as the one John Holder possessed were very important. The water was up to his ankles. He saw then the purpose of this cell. It had been constructed so that water could be turned into it. The helpless wretch who had been left chained to the wall, here, could either confess or could drown. The cell was actually a death trap. Now he understood why no one else had taken the place of Ratface. In dazed horror he watched the water rise to his knees. The sound was now that of a roaring torrent. He knew that his unseen watchers had opened the valve still wider. The water rose to his chest, constricted a cold band there, then surged upward to his throat. Help! He screamed involuntarily. Instantly he heard the valve close. The sound of the torrent stopped. Do you talk now? The speaker on the ceiling asked. Aye. In this moment of terrible threat, he knew he would talk, not to save his life, but because he could not help himself, because he could not keep from talking. He knew also that there was nothing he could put into words which would reveal what he knew to be true. I can't. Again the valve was opened. Again the water came into the narrow cell. It reached Holder's chin. He knew now that they fully intended to drown him if he didn't reveal what he knew. From the viewpoint of the watchers, it was better that he should die than they should take a chance on letting him escape to tell what he knew to someone else. I can't tell you, he screamed. It won't go into words. It's something I do inside my mind. Talk, the loudspeaker answered. But I'm telling you that I can't. His voice took on the sound of a gargle as water poured into his mouth. He spat it out and tried to scream. The water, rising higher, poured into his mouth. He twisted his head upward, shoving against the chains that held him to the wall. The water reached his nose and flowed downward into his lungs. Within a minute at most, the level of the water would be hastily lowered. After he was revived, he would be given a chance to tell what he knew. If he still proved obstinate, the process would be repeated. But Holder did not know this. Some prisoners had withstood repeated duckings only to be drowned in the end. Most told everything they knew after the first treatment. Inside him, John Holder knew that the human body was only a mental construction. Only the strength of an idea held flesh and bones and blood together. He also knew there was no way on earth for him to reveal this secret to another person, in words. Perhaps long and careful study of the nature, the kinds of energies involved, would enable him to give a mathematical description of what he knew he could do inside of him. The Reds would never wait for such a study to be made. They were looking for something as simple and dramatic as E is equal to mc squared, the basic equation that had served for the mathematical springboard for the atom bomb. As the water poured into his nose and down into his lungs, he made one last furious effort. The process had worked on other people. How could he make it work on him? An answer popped into his mind. All he had to do was to think of himself as another person. He did this. Light exploded through his brain and flooded through his whole body. When the water level was lowered, the bewildered Reds found empty chains dangling from the walls of the cell. The body they had placed in the chains was no longer there. 3 days later, the driver of an American jeep on border patrol at night with a squad of men was astonished to find 4 bodies suddenly appear within his headlights. To him they seemed to come out of nowhere. Brake screaming, the driver jerked the jeep to a halt. The sergeant in charge of the squad hastily dismounted. "I'm John Holder, and this is my wife and our 2 children," the man in the glare of the headlights said. "Holder," the sergeant said, "say, we've got a search order out for you. You vanished behind the Iron Curtain." "We have come back through it," Holder answered. "Take us to commanding officer at once." They were put into the jeep. "Johnny, go hide again," the smallest child kept saying, "so we can find him in that place where the light is. Johnny, go hide." "Shh, Teresa," her father answered indulgently. "No more game until we get back to America." He thought longingly of that land across the sea, that to them was home. Besides, it is too hard to find you on the other side and reintegrate a body for you. "John," the woman spoke reprovingly, "why explain it to them? You know they can't understand what you're talking about." Holder grinned and was silent. Sometimes he wondered if he understood it all himself. All he knew was that a body could be disintegrated by pure mental force. The jeep shifted into high gear. At the end of this journey, a plane would be waiting. This would take them to America. Home. There, a whole new world of exploration waited for him. The very best research teams the country possessed would be at his disposal. The keenest brains, the sharpest minds. Hugging the kids to him, he smiled quietly to himself. End of track 19. Track 20.
More scientists do science. In space.
Ed reads Sci-fi, Volume 11. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Story 9. The Rogue Waveform by R.W. Stockhacker. The way it started, Leo Stern decided I should make a publicity appearance at this soiree up in Bel Air. I wasn't happy about the deal. These Bel Air soirees are usually loaded with earnest intellectuals, and if there's one thing that upsets me, it's mingling with earnest intellectuals. But Leo is my manager. What he decides I should do, I do.
"Being seen at this brain ball will be smart box office, Freddy,"
Leo told me.
"You can use a little highbrow publicity."
I could have used a little premonition and second sight, too. It would have kept me from getting mixed up with Panda, the beautiful Ph.D. It would have kept me from taking that fatal fall to Dr. Stanley McClurett's synthetic symbiotic wave. I could have gone on for the rest of my life being the same old obnoxious Freddie Booten. That's my legal name, Freddie Booten. Professionally, I'm known as Don Diablo. This is because I'm supposed to look very sinister. I have basilisk black eyes, a satanic type Van Dyke, and I am all over with muscle. I am what is very loosely termed a wrestler. Very, very loosely. On any given day you can pick up at least 100 heavies around, and about the country you can easily whip me no hands. The reason they consistently refrain from doing this is merely because promoters dearly love to amass money. Time and time again, cash customs will come back to the arena in the hopes of seeing some clean-cut American kid twist me up like a cruller. This never happens, of course. What happens is I leave the clean-cut American kid writhing in frightful agony on the canvas, sneering horribly, a red nylon robe tossed rakishly around my shoulders. I make my victory strut up the aisle. While I strut and sneer, kindly old ladies try to beat me to death with their canes. I am indeed a very obnoxious character. Being obnoxious never bothered me. It was, I always figured, a fast way to stack a buck on top of a buck. In a year or two, if some kindly old lady didn't maim me first, I'd have enough to retire to my pig farm back in Fishhook, Illinois. I'm proud of that pig farm. People may detest me, but I get along fine with pigs. We're real compatible. The party Leo picked out for me to attend that night was being held in one of those mansions which come equipped with their own private mountain. It was jammed clear to the upstairs maid with artists, swamis, and people, and I was prepared to have a very dull night. What I wasn't prepared for was to meet Panda. At the time, I didn't know that's who she was. All I knew was suddenly here was this spectacular girl with a glossy white streak in her satin black hair standing in front of me. She had an orange juice and vodka in one hand, and an expression of mild revulsion on her beautiful face. "I could tell by that silly beard you're a male," she snarled. "But a male what?" And she reached up and dumped the orange juice and vodka over me. It wasn't anything to get sore about. Lots of women threw drinks at me. I'm used to it by now. When it happens, I merely draw myself up to my full 6'4" and drip disdainfully down on the drink tosser. Then I stalk away. If there's a photographer around, I pause and lash my beard a couple of times for the camera. It is, Leo says, very smart box office. It wasn't anything to get sore about, but that's what I did. Something sputtered in my head, and I broke out in flame. Without even bothering to clear it with my conscience, I lifted a foot and planted it on the girl's instep. Not hard enough to break any bones, you understand. Just enough pressure to cause it to shriek in mortal anguish. The shriek got a rousing reaction. Those earnest intellectuals suddenly came boiling toward me in a red wave of wrath. There was a scrawny blonde, built like the ruins of Pompeii, in the lead.
"Let me have him, girls,"
I heard that scrawny blonde whinny.
10 years ago, I took some jujutsu lessons to help protect me from men. Now I want to see if I wasted my money."
I guess she never did find out if she wasted her money. Before she could get her girlish talons into me, some lily-livered flunky pulled the main light switch. In the thick darkness, I barreled my way through the screaming mob. I didn't stop until I climbed into my car. Somebody plopped down into the seat beside me just as I hit the starter.
"Better roll it out for you first,"
a girl's voice yipped excitedly in my ear.
"There's a berserk gorilla loose in there."
I wanted to explain that the berserk gorilla wasn't loose in there anymore. I wanted to say, "Look, sis, that berserk gorilla is me." But judging from the way the riot was building up, I just didn't have the time to spare. I rolled out of there fast. It wasn't until we swung into the lighted boulevard that I realized I'd picked up the furious little female with the striped hair. She recognized me at the same instant. "Yipes," she squalled. "The bearded gargantua." She drew back her foot and aimed a quick kick at my shin. Her open-toed sandal whizzed by my leg and thudded into the dashboard. She grabbed her foot and squalled some more. "Crumpet it up like a balsa kite," she screeched. "Bones sticking out all over. Stop this chartreuse tumble. Let me out of here." I stopped the car. The mood she was in, I felt she just wasn't safe to have around. "I don't want to rush you, sis," I said, "but there'll probably be a broom coming along any minute. Maybe if you crawl out fast, you can grab a ride home." She counted up to 10, cooling off faster than a stripteaser in a drafty igloo. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered. "Why is it I keep blowing my top like this?" I was beginning to feel sorry for her. After all, it wasn't her fault I was so obnoxious. "Don't let it throw you," I said. "You're merely acting normal. Everybody hates me." She stopped massaging her foot and turned to stare incredulously at me. "Everybody?" she gasped. I nodded. "Including kindly old ladies and small dogs," I said. I wasn't boasting or anything, just trying to paint a clear picture for her. She thought it over carefully. I could see an idea begin to form in her big brown eyes. "This is remarkable," she murmured. "This is really remarkable. Mind driving around a bit?" While I drove around, she told me about herself. Her name, she said, was Amarsha Carson, though her friends all called her Panda. She worked for the Kievan Research Foundation. Her boss was Dr. Stanley McClewett, the famous bioelectronicist who is presently doing some important work on waveform mutality. "I have a very good reason for filling you in on all this background material," she went on to explain. "Because of the type of biological electronic research we are carrying on at Kievan, I feel I am in an excellent position to offer a logical explanation as to why everybody finds you so detestable." I told her there wasn't any mystery about that. "I am detestable," I said. She nodded somberly. "You're an abominable clock, and that's a mink-lined fact," she agreed. "But this is in no way your fault. You're simply an unfortunate victim of an extreme variation from the electric norm. You have what we bioelectronicists call a rogue symbiotic waveform." She could be right. Big electronics was a little out of my line. I didn't feel I knew enough about the subject to argue. "What throws me," I said, "is why I should reciprocate your revulsion. I mean, ordinarily I'm a sort of good-natured slob. I don't often get mad, not even at kindly old ladies." It seemed Panda also had a theory about that. "This antagonism undoubtedly stems from the fact that we are at opposite ends of the symbiotic scale," she said. "We are 100% incompatible." We drove around for a couple of hours before I dropped her off at her apartment in Santa Monica. When I finally left, I found I was committed to escorting her down to Long Beach, where I was wrestling that next night. I wanted that date the way a guy on his way to the electric chair wants to sit down. The Long Beach match turned out to be one of my best performances. The sight of Panda sitting there in the front row, her face contorted in a livid mask of hatred, was positively inspiring. When I finally made my victor's march up the aisle, the place was a howling bedlam. Those kindly old ladies were leaping from seat to seat like spindle-legged Tarzans. Leo was all molars by the time he got back down to the dressing room.
"Freddie,"
he chortled,
"tonight you were great. I hear the TV switchboard is jammed with people calling up to swear they will slay you on sight. But slow and painful."
I told Leo I was happy to learn I was such a success.
"You have never been nastier,"
he assured me expansively.
"It must be that dame with the striped hair who was sitting at ringside. She had a high-toned way of screaming for your blood that was very smart box office. Maybe I should step out and give her a couple of free ducats."
I told Leo he needn't bother. "I don't think Panda wants any free ducats," I said. He looked surprised.
"You mean you're acquainted with this piebald babe, Freddie?"
"She came with me," I admitted glumly. "She's a Ph.D. and she lives in Santa Monica."
"Freddie,"
he murmured, shaking his head in honest admiration.
"Sometimes I think you're a much smarter boy than I always figured. What an act your girl put on tonight."
"She wasn't acting, Leo," I said. "She really hates me."
"Freddie,"
he groaned, still shaking his head.
"Sometimes I think maybe you're a much stupider boy than I always figured. You drive this girl up Route 101 tonight, and tomorrow your body will no doubt wash up on the rocks at Redondo."
I wasn't so sure he wasn't right. I wasn't so sure Panda wasn't prowling around the parking area now, a fire axe in each hand. As it turned out, she was sitting quietly in my car. "You unspeakable beast," she greeted me when I climbed in. It was the most restrained statement she had made all evening. On our way up the coast, we stopped at a seafood restaurant. At some of these roadside joints, you can sometimes pick up a lobster loaded with ptomaine. But either Panda was immune to ptomaine, or else I was just unlucky that night. It was while we were in the restaurant that Panda made the request that was to ruin my career.
"Freddie,"
she said, squinting thoughtfully at me, "I wonder if you would do me a favor." I hesitated. I wanted to be polite, but I wasn't going to cut my throat with any knife. "Favor?" I repeated cautiously. She nodded. "I wonder if you would stop in at the Kievan Foundation and let Dr. McClewett type your symbiotic waveform. We may be able to get a wave-shaped picture of the enmity factor in its pure form. Such a study might lead to the unlocking of the riddle of the antipathy some ethnic groups instinctively hold for others. This might easily turn out to be the dawn of a new era." Well, as long as she put it that way, I didn't see how I could refuse. I figure if there's one thing this world can use, it's the dawn of a new era. And so that is how I happened to be at the Kievan Research Foundation early that next evening. The famous Dr. Stanley McClewett came as a complete surprise to me. I was expecting a stoop-shouldered old gentleman in bifocals, but he turned out to be about my age and almost as big. He had a granite jaw and brilliant blue eyes that lit up like a pinball machine whenever he glanced at Panda. He seemed to glance at Panda a lot. The good doctor opened up the proceedings that evening by giving me a rapid-fire briefing on mutuality. He went all the way back to the planarian worms and worked his way up to the primates. He explained that it was his theory that the pattern of all social behavior was determined by a complicated meshing of symbiotic waves. According to him, these waves held the key to the urge of kind to mate with kind. They were the basis of all physical attraction and all physical antipathy. It was very scientific. I never understood a word. When he finished the briefing, he led me into a small lab that looked like a cross between the cockpit of a B-39 and an operating room for midgets. There was a big Contard chair in the center of the lab. "Sit in the chair, Freddy." Panda ordered. I sat in the chair, but I was beginning to get worried. "Look," I said, narrowing my eyes and stealing my voice, "just in case something goes wrong, I'd like to leave a few words for posterity. I'd like to state that I am proud to—" "Stop blubbering, Freddy," Panda snapped, giving me a look that would have carved a duck. "This isn't going to hurt." She was right, Dr. McClure said. All they were going to do was to use a radio-electroencephalograph on me. That radio-electroencephalograph was just a series of modified FM transmitters which they were going to set up around me. Those transmitters would pick up my wave patterns and transmit them over to that receiver in the corner. That receiver would flash the pattern to that oscilloscope beside it. I would be as safe as a baby in its mother's arms. Safer, even. Those FM transmitters weren't going to drop hot cigarette ashes on me. They weren't going to drip gin in my eyes. Just lean back and relax, Dr. McClure finished. I leaned back and tried to relax. Those FM transmitters, I had an idea, were going to have their job cut out for them. That oscilloscope was probably going to turn out to be the blankest oscilloscope in the country. The way it is, I'm more familiar with appearing on TV than on radio. I felt lost without a camera pointing at me. "You want me to suffer a little?" I asked uncertainly. "You want me to lash my beard a few times?" Dr. McClure gave me an unfriendly glance. For a while I sat there and watched them out of the corners of my eyes. Then I began to get restless again. "You reading me all right, Dr. McClure?" I called. He didn't bother to answer, just went on staring at that oscilloscope. "This is remarkable," I heard him mutter. "We must make a photographic record of this. Thus must primitive man's waveform have appeared when he was forced to battle the hairy mammoth." I decided I ought to put the doctor straight on that point. I didn't want to ruin the start of the new era with any misconceptions. "Dr. McClure, I gotta tell you something," I said. "I never battled a hairy mammoth in all my life." He didn't bother to comment on that either. He just went on staring and muttering. I was beginning to build up a back pressure of curiosity. Finally, it got to be too much for me. "You mind if I step over and take a peek?" I called out. Those were my brain waves they were looking at. I wanted to be sure they were cleaned up and cleared for transmission. Panda spun around. "Freddy, don't you dare move," she yipped. "How can you possibly step over and look at your own brain waves?" When I thought it over, it didn't seem logical. I guess it would be like climbing a ladder to see the top of your head. I decided it wasn't anything to start a war about. I don't know what sort of rating I would have picked up in that first show, but I must have impressed Dr. McClure. Anyway, he invited me to come back again that next day. During the following weeks, I suppose, I must have appeared at the Foundation at least a dozen times. I was even beginning to draw a small studio audience. Scientists from all over the country came around to stare thoughtfully at me and to ask me probing questions. I don't know, maybe they figured I must have sneaked down from Mars. Any day now I expected the FBI to drop in and ask me where I'd hid my saucer. On the nights I wasn't wrestling, I got in the habit of going places with Panda. She said she wanted to record the reactions of the unwary human horde to my nauseating personality. As long as I didn't have anything else to do, I didn't mind, but I could tell that Dr. McClure was beginning to resent these field trips. A couple of times I caught him giving me a sort of measuring stare. It reminded me of the way that bear in a carnival used to look at me, like he wished he could get his muzzle off. I mentioned this to Panda. "That Dr. McClure doesn't like my going out with you so often," I told her. "I'm making him jealous." She almost broke herself up with a girlish glee over that. "Oh, brother," she shrieked. "How could anybody possibly get jealous of you, Freddy?" She had a good point. Didn't sound reasonable. All the same, I insisted that Dr. McClure is getting jealous. She told me to stop worrying about it. "I'll handle the good doctor," she said. It was like a kid with a toy blaster telling you to handle that armored column. The very next day the good doctor lowered the boom on me. Panda was lecturing at some women's club out in Pomona when it happened. I hadn't planned on appearing at the Foundation that afternoon, but Dr. McClure called up and asked me if I would stop in. He sounded so genial, I decided Panda must have informed him he now loved me like a brother. For once there were no visiting neurologists waiting in the lab. In fact, there was nothing there but Dr. McClure. "Freddie," he said, opening hostilities with a big false smile, "I have one final experiment I would like to perform on you. I've been holding it back to the last because it may be a bit rough." I asked him how rough did he mean. I said, "I'm resting down at the pier tonight, and I can't go on that card with a broken leg. I'll go out in that card with a broken leg, and those kindly old ladies will part my head right down the middle. This experiment will involve no hazard to limb." He assured me, his smile turning somewhat bleak, "and it may prove to be of great scientific importance." Well, as I thought, as long as it was for science, I ought to do it. After all, science has done a lot for me. If it wasn't for science, I'd probably be crouched in a cold cave, gnawing on a raw buffalo. I wanted science to know I was grateful. Since my last visit to the Foundation, I noticed the doctor had added another piece of equipment. It was set up beside the contour chair. It looked like one of those analyzers they use in garages to check motor performance. There was a long metal barrel sticking out from it. That barrel pointed directly at my head when I sat down in the chair. "Dr. McClure," I said, "if you've got this gun loaded, maybe you better not aim it in my head. I'm liable to dull that bullet." "This instrument is not a gun," he grunted, making a micrometer adjustment. He sighted down the barrel and added, "It's a symbiotic wave-shape modifier." The doctor hadn't been kidding when he said that experiment was going to be rough. One moment I was sitting there, big wheeling civilization on to the dawn of a new era. The next moment a squadron of jet bombers started roaring through my skull. Dr. McClure was waving a bottle of spirits of ammonia under my nose, and I finally opened my eyes. "You all right, Freddie?" he asked in a quavering voice. I staggered to my feet. I had a headache that would have dropped an elephant in its tracks. A team of rough maulers couldn't have done a better job on me with claw holds. "Fine," I groaned, matching him quaver for quaver. "The only reason I look this way is merely because I am dying." By dint of much heaving and tugging, he managed to haul me out to my car and boost me into it. He appeared as nervous as a neophyte murderer trying to get his first corpse under cover. "Drive carefully, Freddie," he said, stepping back. He pulled out a white handkerchief and waved it gently. "Look both ways when you cross Wilshire. Please watch out for dangerous pedestrians." Leo was waiting for me in my dressing room that evening. He gave me an anxious scrutiny. "You feel all right, Freddie?" he inquired solicitously. "You want I should get you an aspirin? You want I should hold a cold cloth on your head?" I had to look twice to be sure this was Leo talking to me. Any other time I'd be lying flat on my face. I could be bleeding out all my arteries, and Leo would probably just boot me in my feet. "Freddie," he would probably say, "what are you, a hypochondriac?" But here he was, clucking over me like a hen over a newborn egg. The rest of the evening was strictly a nightmare out of 3D. By Technicolor, I walked down the aisle, and there wasn't a single, solitary boo in the place. So help me, there was only this soft, pulsing sigh, like a steel guitar stuck on blue Hawaii. The pulsing sigh faded to a breathless hush when I climbed through the ropes. Then suddenly this kid redhead in shorts and store curves leaped to her feet. "Oh, you're a great big beautiful doll, you," she yipped, waving her popcorn at me. From then on, things got real pitiful. I was supposed to be wrestling a guy named Arnie Kapovsky. Arnie never wrestled anyway but hero style, and the crowd broke his heart that night. What happened was each time I started to massage Ernie's eyeballs with my thumbs, the crowd whooped with delight. And each time Arnie worked into a hold such as would be perfectly permissible on any dance floor in the country, those kindly old ladies scrambled through the ropes and wanged him with their canes. Arnie finally terminated this loathsome exhibition by lying down and covering his head with his arms. Either that crowd had to cheer fair or Arnie wasn't going to play. I don't want to linger any longer on that match. It was something better forgotten by one and all. It was a black and infamous blot, buried now in the pages of wrestling history. Let us leave it there. Leo waited until we were back in the dressing room before blowing his top. "Freddie," he screeched, "what disgusting thing have you done? Have you rescued some blonde who is going down in the briny deep for the 9th time?" I told Leo no. "I tried to save a blonde from drowning," I said, "and she'll scream high sea for a shark to come and protect her." "Then have you pulled some tiny toddler out from under the wheels of a careening and malignant truck?" Leo screeched. I told Leo no. "I tried to pull some kid out from under a truck," I said, "and he's liable to bite at my right arm all the way up to my left ear." "Then how come the crowd is cheering on your side?" Leo howled. "Why were they drooling with affection for you?" I couldn't explain it. I was completely confused. If I'd have had a bit more time to think it over, I might have been able to figure it out. But it wasn't until this cop brought Panda down to my dressing room that I found out just what had happened. "Freddie," this cop said, sticking his head in, "there's the young babe with striped hair out there.
This young babe is very excited, young babe. She says she has to see you.
Panda pushed her way in before I could answer. Her face was almost as white as that distinctive streak in her hair.
Freddie, she squealed. Are you all right?
I was getting fed up with that question. It just wasn't normal for people to keep asking it. Of course I'm all right, I snapped.
But Freddie, she wailed, he might have killed you.
I had to laugh. You mean Arnie? I snickered. Why, Arnie wouldn't hurt a fly. Besides, it's against the rules for clean-cut American kids to wrestle rough.
I mean, Dr. McClure, she squalled. That was a very dangerous operation he performed on you. He might have done an irreparable injury to your poor little brain.
In all my life, I'd never heard such a silly statement. Panda, I gotta tell you something, I said. Even that bear at that carnival couldn't damage my brain. He beat both paws to a pulp in my head and then said to hell with it. We used to call that bear Old Limpy. She didn't appear to be paying an awful lot of attention to what I was saying.
Dr. McClure confessed everything, she went on in a tremulous voice. He really was jealous of you, so he decided to modify your waveform. He used an ultrasonic beam to perform a sort of transorbital lobotomy and make you lovable.
It didn't seem like a strictly sensible thing for a smart man like Dr. McClure to do. Still, I guess having a high IQ doesn't necessarily guarantee a man against being a complete jerk in certain things. Why, that poor, stupid genius, I chuckled. Leo let out a strangled roar.
Freddie, he bellowed, what is this Pendo PhD saying? Is she saying you have let some wacky scientist tamper with your putrid personality?
That wacky scientist had tampered all right. There wasn't much point in denying it. So I just raised my eyebrows like a furry pair of humpbacked Japanese bridges. Panda drew a long, shuddering breath and began to close in on me.
When Dr. McClure made that wave shift, she murmured, he overlooked the fact that there is but a very thin line separating love and hate.
She reached up suddenly and slipped her arms around my neck.
Oh, Freddie, she cooed.
It was a pleasant sensation. I mean, it was a sort of change from having drinks splashed over you. For a moment there, I began to think science was wonderful. I still hadn't had time to realize my career had just gone down in flames. I still didn't know what an appalling experience being a lovable character was going to turn out to be. I found out. Oh, brother, how I found out. Twice during the next week, Leo arranged matches for me, and twice those kind old ladies surged through the ropes to protect me. For a while, I kept hoping my new personality would wear off like a hangover, but it kept getting stronger and stronger. If I ran a stoplight, some cop would roar up and apologize for that light's being red. If I stepped into a bar to order a drink, the bartender would beat his forehead in anguish.
Freddie, he'd scream, you've got to take better care of your stomach. Don't drink that slop, I beg you.
Even my pigs were affected by my new waveform. The time I flew back to Illinois to check on my farm, those pigs chased me clear out of the country, nipped at my heels and bayed like beagles, those pigs did. I wasn't too upset about it. I planned on selling the farm anyway. Now that I'm in the diplomatic service, I won't have much time for pig farming. Being the ambassador to Russia is a big job, and I'm worried about it. I don't know whether I'll like having all those Cossacks call me Uncle Freddie. I don't know what I'll do with the Kremlin when they give it to me. End of Track 20. Track 21.
More scientists do science. In space.
It reads Sci-fi, Volume 11. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Story 10. World Atavism by Edmund Hamilton. I write these words in a room perched high in one of New York's highest towers. Beneath me, in the fading sunlight of late afternoon, there stretches the vast mass of the mighty city's structures. New York it is, but such a New York as never man looked upon before. And it is with its familiar but infinitely strange panorama before my eyes that I start now this record of the great change. My name is Alan Harker, Dr. Alan Harker, I could say, for it has been 7 years since I took the degree, and with it a position on the biological staff at Manhattan University. That was a great day for me. Manhattan was one of the most renowned of Eastern universities, and its biological department in particular was known to scientists the world over. This was due not only to the department's unrivaled equipment, but also in greater part to two of the scientists who worked in it, Dr. Howard Grant, head of the department, and Dr. Raymond F, his associate. Very proud I was to have won so soon the opportunity of working with those two world-famed biologists, and even prouder I was when, in the next years, my work came gradually to link my name with theirs. Grant and Fersen and Harker, we were known to scientists across half the world. It was Grant, of course, the eldest of us, who was best known. A tall, saturnine-faced and dark-browed Scotsman, his utter and undivided passion for research was a byword among us. It used to be said, though not in his hearing, that Grant would have vivisected his own grandmother if he thought some new principle might be learned by it. All respected the man, all the man's achievements, but he never had a tithe of the popularity that was Fersen's. Fersen was, in fact, a complete contrast to his superior. A short-statured man of middle age with unruly hair and beard and warm, brown, friendly eyes. As for myself, the third of the trio, I had neither the brilliant scientific mind of Grant nor the keen vision of Fersen, but by dint of ceaseless plodding with monotonous details, I had built for myself a reputation that linked my name with theirs. Aside from our professorial duties in the university's lecture rooms, we had each of us our separate work. I was plodding away with my dull experiments and cell grouping, which I expected would someday yield a theory that would astound all cytologists. Now and then I received help of some difficult point from Fersen, who was himself immersed in an attempt to demolish the Snelson-Moore's revertebration theory by prying into the interior structure of innumerable unheard-of lizards. Grant, however, never received or gave any help, keeping his work entirely to himself. We had gathered from his rare references to it that he had been working for months on one of the broader problems of evolutionary science, but that was all we knew, and we were as amazed as any when Grant published the statement that touched off the sensational evolution controversy. It is needless for me to give here all the details of the thing. It is sufficient to say that Grant, in his statement, announced that he had solved at last the greatest enigma of biological science, that he discovered the cause of evolution. One can understand what an uproar that statement created, and was bound to create, for the cause of evolutionary change has always been the supreme problem of biology. Long ago, Darwin and Wallace and Lamarck and their fellows had laid the processes of evolution bare. They had shown to an astonished world that life on Earth was not static in forms that had always existed and always would exist, but that it was in constant change and movement up through constantly changing forms. The Eohippus had changed, had evolved into the horse, and in future ages would be something different still. The great felines that had roamed Earth had evolved into smaller forms and into tame cats. A certain branch of ape-like forms had evolved into great hairy troglodytes, and then into modern men. All life on Earth was constantly changing, evolving, forced ever upward through the diverging channels of evolution into new and different forms. But what force was it that pressed Earth's life thus upward through the paths of change? What force was it that caused all this vast, slow evolution of Earth's creatures into different creatures, that had begun with the first jelly-like life forms on Earth, and had forced the tide of life up from them to the forms of today, that still was slowly changing them? That question none could answer. Environment did not explain it, for though environment had certain effects on the life forms in it, it was not responsible for that deep, vast tide of upward evolution. Mendelism had seemed for a time to suggest an explanation, but had failed in the end to do so. Some great force there was, all knew, that pressed life always up the path of evolution, but none had ever guessed what that force might be, and the thing had come to be accepted at last as one of the insoluble problems of science. And now Grant claimed that he had solved it. "For long," Grant's statement said, "I have held that since evolutionary change is unquestionably caused by some definite and omnipresent force acting upon all life on Earth, it should be possible to discover the nature of that force. I will not recount the work of months which I have spent in constant search for this force, but will say that finally I have been successful, have identified the force which my experiments show beyond all doubt to be the single force responsible for the upward course of evolution on Earth. That force is a vibratory force, a vibration unknown to Earth's physicists prior to my discovery of it, which has as its source the sun. The sun, we know, is a vast mass of incandescent matter, which ceaselessly pours out part of its matter transformed into energy. The energy thus formed, flooding out in all directions from the sun through space, takes various forms. At a certain vibratory frequency, it takes the form of light and illuminates our day. At another frequency, it is radiant heat, warming our world. At still another, it is the cosmic ray so recently discovered. There are many others known to us, and still more of which we know nothing as yet. A vast welter of vibratory forces flooding endlessly outward from the sun. And it is one of those vibrations, which we may well call the evolution vibration, which is responsible for the evolutionary change of all life on Earth. In this there is nothing astounding. The sun's various vibratory forces affect all living things on Earth profoundly, each in a different manner. Without the light vibrations, Earth's life would fade and die, the absence of the ultraviolet waves being fatal in time. Without its heat radiations, all life would freeze. And without this evolution vibration playing ceaselessly upon Earth, all life upon Earth would no longer be pressed upward through the paths of evolution, would slip back swiftly down those paths, down the myriad roads up which it has surged for so long. For not only is it this evolution vibration that forces Earth's life upward on a way of change, it is this vibration that keeps Earth's life from slipping backward. Thus for Grant's statement. To Fersen and me it was as astonishing as to the rest of the scientific world, for not until then did we learn what work it was that had occupied Grant for so long. Yet even we two, I think, were surprised at the sensation that that statement caused. Always the work of Dr. Grant had been accepted almost without question, so great was his reputation, and so brilliant his achievements. But with the publication of this amazing new theory of his, the general dislike of the man that had always lain latent burst forth into a storm of criticism. It was admitted that the new vibratory force which Grant had discovered did apparently exist, since other scientists working on his data had corroborated his work on it. But it was denied by Grant's numerous critics that this force was what he claimed it to be, the cause of evolutionary change. It was impossible, they stated, that such a so-called evolution vibration could in reality be responsible for the course of evolution on Earth. And it was even more absurd to suggest, as Grant had done, that were that force withdrawn, were the evolution vibration to cease to play on Earth from the sun, the living beings on Earth would slip swiftly backward on the road of change. The controversy over the thing grew, in fact, to a point of bitterness unprecedented in scientific discussion, a bitterness intensified by the comments of the saturnine and black-tempered Grant. In a series of sardonic statements, he compared his critics to those who had derided the work of Darwin and his fellows, and indulged in some rather acrid personalities. Those in turn provoked facer attacks, and the whole matter grew thus quickly into an unseemly intellectual brawl. To Fersen and myself, the whole controversy seemed a useless one, because in the course of time, experimentation by other scientists would definitely prove or disprove Grant's theory. Yet neither of us ventured to suggest that to our bitter superior, and so the wrangle grew in intensity in the next days, until it suddenly came to a head. It was the elderly President Rogers of Manhattan University who brought the thing to a focus. He and the university's other officials had been growing more and more restive under the criticisms that Grant's controversy was bringing on the school, and so at last he suggested that a meeting be held at which Grant could lay his theories and data before his fellow scientists in their entirety. This Grant accepted, and so did most biologists of any note within travelling distance of New York. So widely had the clamour of the dispute spread. and on an afternoon Grant rose before several hundred assembled scientists in one of the university's lecture halls to explain his discovery. There is little need for me to tell at length of what took place at that meeting, which both Ferguson and I attended. At the first appearance of Dr. Grant, his enemies in the audience grew vocal in their criticisms, and before he had spoken a quarter of an hour, the hall was in such an uproar as a scientific meeting has seldom heard. Twice Grant made an effort to go on, and each time his voice was drowned by a storm of shouted cries. The president, chairman of the meeting, was rapping vainly for order, but Grant only stood still, looking out over the stormy meeting with a cold contempt in his eyes, yet with a strange fire in them. Quietly he rolled up the data sheets in his hand and thrust them into his pocket, and as quietly stepped forward to the platform's edge. Something in his bearing, in his expression, quickly quieted the noisy throng before him. His voice came out over the hall, cold and clear. "You have not let me give to you the proof for which you asked," he said. The president stepped to his side, said something rapidly, but Grant shook his head calmly. "No proof that I can give you here would convince you of my theory's truth, I know," he told the silent throng before him. "But I will give you proof of it yet. To you and to the world I will give a proof such as the world has never seen before." Before any could move, he had walked from the platform and out of the hall. A buzz of excited voices broke out instantly, in comment and criticism. It was some hours later before Ferguson and I got from the meeting to Grant's laboratory, but Grant was not there. Within 24 hours more we knew, and all at the university knew, that Dr. Grant had disappeared. From the meeting he went to his laboratory, burned some papers there and pocketed others. Then he went to his rooms, hastily packed a few bags, and departed. He left no note, no message. His action brought to a climax the whole sensation of the controversy he had precipitated, and Grant's going was taken by many of his critics as a confession of the falsity of his position. He had had no close relatives to start a search for him, and though to Ferguson and me his strange departure seemed astounding, we could explain it no better than others. The sensation subsided, and Ferguson was appointed to head the department in place of the vanished scientist. Our own work occupied us once more, and certainly neither Ferguson nor I, any more than another, guessed what lay behind Grant's strange action. It was 6 months after Grant's departure that the great change began. The first intimation was brought to the public notice by a New York newspaper. In a sensational article entitled, "Is a New Crime Wave Upon Us?" it pointed out that in the last few days an unprecedented number of crimes of violence had taken place. These were the more appalling in that many seemed quite without motive. In New York alone, in those few days, there had been more than a dozen murders, mostly clubbings and stabbings, which had apparently been provoked by the slightest of causes. In Chicago, a respected clerk of middle age had for some annoyance turned suddenly and fractured the skulls of 3 of his associates with a heavy bar. From San Francisco and Los Angeles had come news of half a dozen holocausts in which one member of a family had slaughtered or attempted to slaughter all the others. From every part of the land there were coming reports of the most horrifying crimes of violence, the great majority of which seemed inspired by the pettiest of causes. And this same wave of homicidal mania seemed to work over all the world. It was as though hundreds in Earth's population had suddenly had their reason dwarfed and their passions magnified. No less than 3 solid householders in London had run amok in bursts of sadistic fury that had cost a half-score lives. The Paris police had taken from the Seine more human bodies, many terribly mutilated, than had ever been found in it in a like time before. Germany was aghast over 2 mass murders of unexampled fiendishness that had occurred in a Rhenish and Silesian village. There was news of an even more terrible slaying in Calcutta, and word of murders almost as terrible from almost every country on the globe. Nor was it murder alone that was stalking the earth, for robberies of the utmost brutality were even more numerous. overshadowed as they were by the greater horror, they were as astonishing in nature, for all, like the slayings, seemed the result of sudden, brutal instincts or desires uncontrolled by reason. Small shopkeepers in American and English towns were struck down for trifles. In the stores of great cities, there were those who snatched childishly at desired objects and attempted a hopeless escape to the street. That was the keynote of all these robberies, of all these crimes, the unreasoning childishness of them. For the great part of them were attempted under circumstances which should have shown to even the most dull-witted that there was no chance of success. It was a wave of strange and terrible crime indeed that was sweeping over all the earth. The newspapers concerned themselves with it to the exclusion of all else soon. They sought for explanations. What had caused this sudden release of the most brutal passions of numberless people? Many were the answers. An eminent scientist declared that the nerve-wracking strain of modern civilization had reached such a pitch that the human mind could no longer stand it, was giving way beneath it. Many wrote serious letters to the press, denouncing the motion pictures as schools of crime. Others defended them. And while the cause was thus argued, the great wave of crime and utter lawlessness that had rolled across earth seemed increasing in volume. The number of deaths by violence that were each day recorded had grown now to an appalling figure. Murderous attacks were common in every one of Earth's great cities. Men hurled themselves at each other's throats, apparently for a word, a gesture. Nor was this all. A strange, erratic insanity seemed seizing more and more of Earth's millions. Numberless were those reported to the authorities as missing, those who had wandered causelessly away from home and family. The world's roads held an unprecedented number of vagrant wanderers. But in a few days more, even this astounding wave of appalling crime was dwarfed in importance by more astounding and more terrible happenings. Accidents, a great number of them fatal to many, were occurring in every part of Earth in an amount that was all but incredible. More than 100 people had gone to death in the crash of 2 thundering passenger trains in Colorado, a crash that had been due to the failure of an engineer to heed the plainest of signals. 2 train wrecks in northern England had taken a toll of life almost as great, and there were reports of many other crashes from various parts of Earth. In every one, the accident had been due to the inexplicable failure of the human element, the failure of dispatcher or switchman or engineer to perform the duty that habit should have made automatic. In one case, that of the Austrian disaster, the crash had been directly caused by the sudden craziness of a switchman, who, for some slight grievance, had sent a long passenger train crashing through an open switch and down an embankment. There was news as terrible from the seas. Wireless reports flashed thick with word of ships that had blundered fatally on rocks or shoals, by fault of helmsman or navigating officer. The greater part of these, fortunately, were freight ships of medium and small size, but one case sent a thrill of horror through Earth, already steeped in horror. That was when the great transatlantic liner Garonia, bound to Southampton, crashed by night into the southern Irish coast, with the resulting loss of 3/4 of the 1,000 humans it carried. And that wreck, like the others, was due to an utterly inexplicable failure of the ship's personnel. Smaller in magnitude, but taking a total of 4 more lives, were the unnumbered accidents that took place in the thickly populated and highly mechanized countries of North America and Europe. The number of automobile deaths, always staggering America, reached a stunning total in those last fateful days of September. Crashes took place at every corner, and the running down of pedestrians became a common occurrence everywhere. Many cars mowed a path of death through street and sidewalk before they were halted, the drivers losing apparently all faculty of control of them. And in mill and shop and factory, death's grim hand was reaping as thickly. Men, upon whom the lives of many depended, suddenly lost control of their machines and sent those many to death. Countless others were mangled or crushed to death by the great mechanisms they had operated for years without mishaps. Airplane crashes became so numerous that many sections of the world peremptorily forbade all further flying until the cause of it all could be ascertained. It was as though more and more of the masses of men were becoming incapable of handling the mechanisms, of conducting the operations that they had been executing for years. Was mankind going collectively insane? It seemed insanity, indeed, that was sweeping Earth now. Riots had taken place on a small scale here and there in those days, but it was not until the 1st of October that the first of the great outbreaks took place in London. Crowds of wandering men and women began the looting of shops, the breaking of windows, and the rioting swiftly spread. So swiftly did it spread, in fact, that by the time the troops called to suppress it appeared on the scene, unestimated thousands were engaged in the wild search for plunder. At the order to fire and a regular volley from the troops killed scores, but in the pitched mob battle that followed, scores of the soldiers took the side of the looters. The combat between mob and soldiers was forgotten, and the battle became a wild scene of brutality and violence, in which hundreds were slain and trampled. In the end it required machine guns to disperse them. A similar great outbreak in New York was curbed quickly a day later by the use of planes and tear bombs. But 2 days after, there came a huge riot of unexampled bloodiness in Chicago, which cost several thousand lives, and which resulted in the burning of a third of the city. Beginning as a race riot, and developing to a savage general battle for loot, it was notable for the fact that the troops called to suppress it broke up even before they reached the scene, and occupied themselves in brutal looting and battle of their own. And a score of great riots in the other cities of Earth had similar results. Civilization seemed crashing with this oncoming dissolution of its organization and institutions. Had humanity gone insane indeed? Swiftly, with full realization of the peril upon it by them, a conference of the world's most noted scientists had been called some days before at New York to explain and to halt, if possible, this wave of seeming insanity that was gripping more of the masses of humanity each day, and that was disintegrating civilization. But when those scientists met, the world learned that they had 100 different explanations of the thing, no two agreeing. The famous American alienist who had voiced his opinion days before reiterated his belief that the minds of men were giving way en masse beneath the strain of modern civilization. A Romanian bacteriologist claimed that the thing was the result of a contagious new brain disease spreading over Earth, and claimed to have isolated the bacterium of that disease. The scientists, gripped seemingly by something of the erratic condition of mind they were striving to explain, argued these theories and others with utmost passion, sometimes attacking each other. An English physicist who suggested that Earth was passing through strange mind-affecting gases in space was assaulted by the proponent of another theory. And still more furious and incredulous, the world learned, was the reception given to the explanation of a New York biologist named Fersen, who claimed that the whole Great Terror was the result of the human race's slipping backward on the road of evolution. World Atavism, a throwback of all the world's life on the road of evolution. So they learned, Fersen had cried to the assembled scientists. All Earth's animal life is beginning to slip back, and man, as the most recently developed animal, is slipping first, is going back toward the savage state, toward the caveman or troglodyte, toward the ape. He is losing control of his passions as he goes back, which accounts for the violence that now fills Earth, and he is losing the mental capacity of modern man, which accounts for his inability to operate longer our modern machines. A world atavism that is beginning with the atavism of the human races. But what could cause such world atavism as that? The incredulous scientists had cried. The evolutionary theory of my former associate, Dr. Grant. Fersen had begun, but was interrupted by a chorus of derisive shouts provoked by the mention of the scientist whose ridiculous theory had been exploded. So Fersen had been forced from the meeting by the furious scientists, who seemed seized indeed with the erratic craziness that was gripping the world. Another day they advanced and argued their theories that grew ever more impossible, more incoherent, and then the meeting dissolved in a general riotous brawl of the arguing scientists. They, in common with the rest of the races of men, seemed incapable longer of calm thought, of cool, unimpassioned reasoning. 2 were killed, throttled in the brawl that ended the meeting, and the rest scattered. They were not followed or punished, for now the disintegration of humanity's institutions had become such that the crime was unheeded. Men were out-rivaling each other in mad action. Those in high places, as in low, were gripped by the insanity that had apparently seized earth, and from the cabinets and congresses of a score of nations came declarations of war against other nations, for the slightest of reasons, or for none at all. England, the United States, France, Germany, Italy, Turkey, Japan, and China. These and a dozen others issued frenzied and incoherent calls to arms, but they were unheeded. Even war now could not penetrate the unreasoning minds of men. Armies had broken up, all discipline and organization vanishing. A few who tried to keep their soldiers in line found that the men could no longer handle the great guns and instruments of war, found that most of them were incapable of the operation of rifles. Civilization was crashing with a prolonged roar of falling laws, and institutions and customs echoing across the world. The ordinary methods of transportation and production having completely broken down days before, the stream of food into the great cities had abruptly ceased. The brutal throngs that filled those cities subsisted by looting the existing food supplies for a time, but soon these were exhausted, and then terrible battles took place between the rioters for food which they had found. Battles they were of hordes of ragged brutes, of savages who fought with knives or with their bare hands in the streets. Only occasionally was a shot heard, for almost none there was now with sufficient dull glimmer of intelligence to manipulate a gun. In the shadow of the tall towers of New York, and in the brick and stone acres of London and the boulevards of Paris, thousands and hundreds of thousands of these savages swarmed, the ways choked with corpses of the slain. At night they crouched fearfully in hallways and offices and corridors, the vast cities lying dark and silent beneath the stars. Shapes of prowling animals were being seen in some of them by night. No wheel turned in all the world now, for none seemed left with intelligence enough to operate the simplest machine. And these swarms that had been human were changing in appearance too. The men were unshaven and hairier, it seemed. Much clothing had been discarded, crude belts that held knives on the like weapons being retained. They crouched now as they walked, their step a watchful animal-like one. From under shaggy brows they stared at each other, small crude family groups held together, the man battling other men for the possession of food. Some managed to kill animals and wore the skins. They were troglodytes, millions of them, men such as the world had seen thousands of years before, as humanity had been then. They were troglodytes, wandering through the cities and towns that they themselves had built, staring in wondering fear about them at things the purpose of which they could not understand. But most had no wonder, only a brutal lack of interest in all save food and mating and sleep. There were no fires, for all had lost the use of fire and feared it now. Driven by hunger, great masses of them were pouring out of the cities into the countryside, to hunt roots and herbs and kill small animals for food. They made rude shelters for a time, then abandoned them for caves and crannies in the rocks. They ceased to use knives or spears. They could but throw great stones at each other, or wield chance clubs, or fight with bare hands. Many had remained in the cities, and among them was more fighting. With each day they were changing farther, it seemed, going farther back along the long road of change that man had ascended so slowly through the ages, and that he was slipping back upon so swiftly. The streets of New York and Glasgow and Constantinople and Yokohama saw them, these animal-like, ape-like hordes that wandered there. Ape-like they were becoming, indeed, swiftly hairier of body, more crouching of gait, stooping occasionally and moving to run on hands and feet. Clothing they had discarded. The fragmentary, mumbled speech that they had kept until days before had given way to a meaningless medley of barking shouts and cries, whose tone conveyed their crude attempt at communication. They roamed the great cities in little groups or tribes, of each of which one was the strongest, the tyrant, the acknowledged lord. and now they were changing still. Were running more on hands and feet, walking upright less, back from man to troglodyte, and from troglodyte to ape had the human races gone, and now were slipping back still into the animal races from which the apes had come. World atavism, and it was wiping the last human-like forms from the face of the earth. Of this great change that in days swept man back into the brutal forms of dead ages, I, Alan Harker, was a witness from the first. For it was at New York that the early manifestations of the change had been first noticed, in that increasing wave of terrible crime that was in days to rage over the whole earth. Neither Fersen nor I, of course, had any suspicion of the thing's real magnitude in those first days. We followed with the same astonishment that held most in the world, the astounding growth of crime and violence, but it was remote from our own interests, and we were both very much absorbed in our differing work of experimentation. We spent more time in that work, indeed, in those days than before, for both Fersen and I seemed to have lost a little of our usual skill and knowledge. I know that he caught himself in inexplicable lapses, and I know that I, usually the most patient of biologists, forgot myself in sudden impatient rage on one or two occasions, and smashed retorts and test tubes about me. Neither of us dreamed, of course, that we were being affected by the same strange forces that were releasing humanity's passions in a carnival of crime. But when a little later the great wave of crime that was making Earth hideous was made more terrible by the innumerable inexplicable accidents that were occurring, Fersen became thoughtful. He deserted his own white-tiled laboratories for the university's psychological test rooms, with their strange recording instruments, and spent hours there carrying out intricate tests of the reactions of himself and others. It was after 2 days of such tests, when the fatal accidents occurring everywhere were taking toll of thousands of lives daily, and when almost all industrial activity was slowing and stopping because of them, that Fersen came back, his countenance as I had never seen him. "I found it, Alan," he said quietly, "the cause of all this terror, these innumerable crimes and accidents and riotings." "The cause of them?" I repeated, uncomprehendingly, and he nodded. "Yes, and that cause is world atavism. An atavism, a throwback of all the worlds of the animal life that is beginning with man as the most recently developed animal, and that is taking place before our eyes, taking place in ourselves even." "World atavism," I gasped. "But Fersen, that such a thing could be, it's inconceivable." He shook his head. "Not inconceivable. You remember Grant and his theory that the evolution vibrations from the sun were what had pushed Earth's life up the road of evolution. And you remember that Grant said that were those evolution vibrations to cease to reach Earth from the sun, all Earth's life would slip swiftly back upon that road." "I remember," I said. "But how could such a thing happen? What could ever hold the play of the sun's evolution vibrations on Earth?" Fersen's eyes were somber. "I do not know what could," he said slowly, "but I think I know who could." "Fersen," I cried, "you don't for an instant think that Grant—" "I do think so," he said, his voice steely. "Grant discovered the existence of the evolution vibrations. He alone of men knew all concerning them. Do you remember what he said when they refused to let him explain his theory, even at that meeting? He said, 'I will give you proof of this. I will give you proof yet of this theory, and such a proof as the world has never seen before.'" My mind was reeling. "Then you think that when Grant disappeared that he—" "I think that great proof that Grant promised in his rage to give the world is the world atavism that is upon humanity now. I think that Grant in some inconceivable way has used his knowledge and his power to deflect or dampen the evolution vibrations coming toward Earth from the sun, and that it is because of the absence of those vibrations that Earth's life is slipping backward." "But where will it stop?" I exclaimed. "It will not stop, Harker. The tremendous change has only begun. Man, the most recently evolved of all animals, is changing first, and will go back through troglodyte and ape to the forms before them, back through changing beast forms. By then the other animals of Earth will be changing also, thrown back along the evolutionary road, and that great atavism will continue until Earth's life has all changed back into the first crude protoplasmic forms from which eons ago it sprung." "But what can we do?" I cried. "There must be some way of stopping this." "There is only one way," he said. Grant is causing this great world atavism, is shutting off the sun's evolution vibrations from Earth by projecting toward the sun, no doubt, a great dampening or neutralizing vibration that stifles them, annihilates them at their source. We must find Grant's whereabouts, must destroy whatever apparatus he's using to do that. Yet if all are changing, we too also must be changing, I exclaimed, and he nodded. We too are already a little affected, as all men are, more or less. Our lapses of memory, the difficulties we have in our work now. These things in the last days are the result of this world atavism in us, just as the crimes and accidents filling Earth are. And we too must protect ourselves against this tremendous change, whatever we do, for on us depends the one chance of halting Grant's terrible work. The world will never believe that dread work is really going on, until it is too late, so you and I must not change. Fersen went swiftly on to explain his idea. This was none other than to construct 2 small projectors that would each automatically and ceaselessly generate artificial evolution vibrations, vibrations affecting a limited range as the sun's vibrations had affected all Earth. These projectors in their compact cases could be worn on our bodies by each of us without being noticeable, and would keep each of us always thus in the range of the vital vibrations, so that we would not be affected by the worldwide absence of that which was causing this world atavism. Whatever great dampening wave Grant was sending out toward the sun to neutralize its evolution vibrations would not, of course, affect the vibrations of our own little projectors. The next 2 days saw us at work upon these projectors. The method of producing the evolution vibrations we knew, for as I have mentioned, they had been artificially produced in a small way by physicists upon Grant's first announcement of his theory. The second day, therefore, saw our projectors complete, small, flat black cases that were strapped to our belts without being noticeable, each holding the tiny but marvelously powerful batteries that were the current source, and the compact little generator that automatically and unendingly released the vital evolution vibrations for a range of several feet. With these completed and working, and secured thus by them from being ourselves affected by the terrible atavism that was upon the races of man, we began our greater work of locating Grant and the apparatus by which he was shutting off the sun's vibrations and loosing this horror on the Earth. For horror it had now become, and the world was waking up to its true nature as every sort of brutal passion was released in terrible crime over it, and as the inexplicable mindlessness of men brought on terrific accidents. Already a dozen of the greatest governments in cooperation had called a conference of Earth's greatest scientists at New York to explain, or to halt at least, the horror that was sweeping Earth. To that conference they came with each a different and more incredible explanation of the thing, and to it went Fersen and I to give them the true explanation, and to turn them toward the search for Grant that might yet save humanity. But that explanation was never given, for Fersen's first mention of world atavism was greeted with incredulous cries, and when he went on to mention Grant, such a derisive storm arose that he was forced bodily from the meeting, leaving the scientists disputing fiercely over the most impossible of theories, supporting and opposing those theories by blows. For they, like the rest of humanity, seemed incapable now of clear and sustained thought upon any subject. Even Fersen and I, working day and night in the isolated Upper Manhattan laboratories of the university, were able to see clearly what was happening about us. We were living, eating, sleeping at the laboratories by this time, for all means of transportation and all industrial activities were ceasing. Great masses of men roamed the streets of the city, some forming into gangs that made life terrible for the others, the rest engaged in indiscriminate looting. The great London riot and the abortive outbreak in Lower New York had now taken place, and it was evident to all that the last shadow of law and order in the city was vanishing, for more and more the troops and police who maintained it were engaging in the rioting themselves. News came still a little in incoherently written and erratically printed sheets for a few days, and it was thus we learned of the huge Chicago riot and subsequent fire. It marked the beginning of the end. Within a few days more utter lawlessness reigned over New York. Corpses lay in its streets and looters were everywhere. The university buildings, deserted now by all but ourselves, were not attacked except on a few occasions by the looting swarms, there being no food or other desirable things in them, and Fersen and I had rifles and pistols in our laboratory to repel the ragged and brutal gangs that might attack us. In those terrible days we were occupied heart and soul in the work of locating Grant, and whatever mechanism it was by which he was casting this doom on humanity. It was Fersen's idea that the great damping wave which Grant must be sending toward the sun to halt the play of its endless evolution vibrations would affect certain recording instruments, if the correct frequency for their circuits could be found. Once that was found, by observing the amount by which the instruments were affected at different locations, by the waves of the great damping vibration, we could calculate and chart that great wave's source with some degree of accuracy. It seemed to me a very slender chance, yet I knew as well as did Fersen that it was the one possible way. Grant, we knew, would have protected himself, as we had, by a small artificial projector of the vibrations. So in those fearful days we worked with the recording instruments, watching them at each new trial for some indication of the force whose source we sought. The whole great mass of New York's giant structures that stretched southward and downward from our laboratory lay now in complete darkness each night, the last wonted activities of civilization having ceased in it as elsewhere. Ragged hordes of savages roamed it, savages so hairy and crouching and brutal of face, seeming each day more prognathous of jaw and slanting of brow and animal-like of eye, that we knew them to be troglodytes, cavemen, men such as humanity had been ages before, and such as it was over all earth now. We saw them occasionally prowling through the university grounds in search of food, shambling toward us with lowering brows to attack us when they glimpsed us, but fleeing in fear when we fired over their heads. For none of them could manipulate so complicated a thing as a firearm. All Earth's hundreds of millions were prowling their way in just such brutal bands, thrown back to the state that had been man's before history's dawn. And even more brutal and hairy and animal-like they were becoming as they slipped back farther still, back from troglodyte to ape. Mankind was gone, transformed into these still changing brutes, all except Fersen and me. I cannot tell now in full of those terrible last days of change, those days in which, in our chance glimpses, we saw men making that other terrible step backward, from troglodyte to ape. For Fersen and I were working with the speed of utter despair. Even were Grant's terrible work to be halted, the sun's evolution vibrations again released on Earth, it would take them untold ages to raise the brute-like beings about us to the state of men once more. Humanity was passing, had passed, into the brute around us. Yet for their sake, for the sake of the humanity that might rise again in the dim future, we kept to our efforts, sought still to halt this awful change that would otherwise not stop until protoplasmic slime alone was left living on Earth. We had found the correct frequency for the circuits of our recording instruments, and in feverish haste set up those instruments at intervals of a mile, working through the night. The weirdest of work it was, the vast city streets and structures silent in the night around us, the countless hordes of brute-like beings that once had built them, now cowering in the buildings in ape-like fear of the night's mysteries. We took our readings, hastened back to our laboratory, and dawn found us marking those readings on the great chart map of the section we had ready. Somewhere in that section, somewhere near New York, we knew, Grant lurked with his terrible mechanism, our first readings having shown us that. And now, as with trembling hands, Fersen and I drew the graphs on the big chart, we stared for a moment after in complete silence. Those lines converged at a point in a midtown block of the great city south of us, a block occupied by a single gigantic building, whose aspiring tower was in sight of our laboratory's windows. For moments, Fersen and I stared from chart to tower in silence, and then without words we had turned, seen to the filled magazines of the pistols at our belts, and were passing out of the laboratory into the bright sunlight. As silent as ever, we started southward. Never, were my existence extended 1,000 years, could there be blotted from my memory that journey southward through the silent towers of New York that Fersen and I made then. For the great city that lay silent about us beneath the brilliant noon sunshine was a city of horror unutterable. Dead lay thick in its streets, and great dogs, already strange and fierce and wolf-like, ran in packs among them. The rusting wrecks of smashed automobiles were piled at every corner. No window of all we passed remained intact. Sidewalks and streets were sprinkled with shivered glass. Westward across the river, a great fire was burning in the cities there, pouring a black volume of flame-laced smoke up to the skies. But more terrible than all of these things were the hordes, the swarms of creatures that moved through the streets and ways about us, the countless creatures that once had been the city's people. Great ape-like creatures they were, not apes such as men had known, but ape-like races such as men had sprung from eons before. In groups and packs of scores they roamed the city's ways, covered with thick hair, stooped and crouching of gait. The garments that they had worn as men torn and discarded, there was in them no semblance to humanity. They walked stiffly toward each other, stooping to rest hairy forearms on the ground each few steps. They growled and barked in rage, or chattered volubly and meaninglessly. The majority were prowling in wrecked stores for fragments of food. Others moved along the streets in a search for small animals, for insects even. Growling in rage, their groups came toward Fersen and me as we moved onward, but each time a pistol shot sent them fleeing from us. We moved on, never speaking, Fersen's face icy calm, my own brain reeling. We came at last to the base of the giant building that we knew must hold whatever mechanism Grant was using to withhold the evolution vibrations from the earth. Fersen turned to speak to me for the first time. "Somewhere in here," he whispered. "We must search Harker to find Grant's apparatus." "And if he is with it?" I asked, but his only answer was to tighten his grip on the pistol in his hand. We passed into the great building's marble entrance hall, a place of dim shadows through which we stumbled over prostrate dead. We went quickly through the looted, wrecked rooms that had been the luxurious shops of its first level. Then the stairs, and we were going upward, level after level, searching through the immense building's numberless offices and rooms. And one or two were dead, and some had been wrecked, but in no part of the building, it seemed, were any of the ape-like throngs. That seemed encouraging, somehow, and with beating hearts we pressed on upward. Level after level, we were high in the immense building. Its floors here were smaller of extent because of its pyramidal form. Yet there was no sound from the shadows about us, no sign of what we sought. Despair was growing in us, for we were high in the great tower that was the building's uppermost part, and had found nothing. Through the shadowy halls we pressed still, and through the silent rooms, lit with the gold of the westward swinging sun. But as we moved up the narrow stair toward the last and highest level of the great tower, something flamed in Fersen's eyes as in mine. A sound had come from above to our ears, a steady, slow clicking, as of a great clock. Pistols in hand, we moved up, found ourselves in a small hall at the tower's side. The unused elevator shaft was beside us, and the stairs that led to the roof. But before us was the single door that gave access, apparently, to the whole space of the tower's uppermost level, and from behind it came the slow clicking to our ears. As one, we crossed the hall toward that door, Fersen's hand on its knob, turned slowly and slowly. Astoundingly, the door swung open. Our pistols lowered for the moment in our amazement. We stepped through, stopped. A dozen feet before us stood Grant, a heavy automatic in his hand, trained upon us. Silence. In it Grant's eyes held ours. His dark-browed, powerful face was lit with unholy triumph, with sardonic exultation. I saw that before us was the whole space of the tower's highest level, thrown into one great room. Huge, black-cased and powerful batteries were ranged upon each other in scores at one side of the room. Armored cables led from them through incalculable generators and transformers to a great object at the big room's center. It was like a giant searchlight, a dozen feet or more in diameter, swung in a frame resembling gimbals so that it could be turned in any direction. The 12-foot disc inside it glowed silently with white light, and the great thing was turned to face exactly the sinking sun westward. It was slowly following the descending sun, turning slowly under the action of a great clock mechanism, whose clicking was loud in our ears still. Grant, Fersen, and I, we were silent there in the room, all motionless, until Grant spoke. His voice was metallic, controlled, mocking. "Fersen and Harker," he was saying. "Fersen and Harker, who believed in my theory, my power, it seems, when none else on earth did, who made projectors like the one that I wear, and have escaped the world doom that I have released, have escaped and have come in search of me, with pistols in their hands even." My brain was racing. I knew that to lift the arms in our grasp meant instant death. Grant's sardonic mirth lashed suddenly out in scorn. "To come through the city toward this building firing shots," he mocked. "Shots that made those brute swarms beneath us flee, but that warmed me at the same time of your coming, to steal clumsily in upon me that way, thinking to surprise me and halt the work that's not yet finished." "That work has gone on too long, Grant," said Fersen slowly, his voice strange. "It cannot go on longer." "Cannot?" came in a bitter voice. "You mistake, Fersen. It must and shall. What are they now but brutes, animals, the world of men that derided and refused my work, that might have transformed them into gods? Brutes, and even more brutal shall they become, going down through form after form to the first protoplasm. They asked for proof. I have given the world proof, have thrown back humanity eons on the road of progress, and I will throw them and all Earth's life back farther still. This great projector, it is worth the months it took to build it, months that I toiled here and posed as a scientist, studying electrical phenomena, working to finish the projector at last and turn its great damping vibration toward the sun in a mighty ray. A vibration tuned to neutralize and destroy that part of the sun's evolution vibrations radiating toward Earth. You have lost, Fersen. Hark, for you both die this moment, and this projector shall continue to withhold the evolution vibrations from Earth until its life has been thrown back in this world atavism into the primal protoplasm, until I alone am left living upon—" His pistol roared, for it was at that instant that Fersen leaped. For even the bullet could not halt Fersen's rush, so swift and unexpected was it, and he struck Grant, knocked him back. I leaped toward the projector. Grant's pistol was detonating, even as he was knocked back, though, and halfway to the machine something seemed to strike me two swift, smashing blows beneath the shoulder. I swayed, staggered onto the projector, was beneath it, and reaching toward the cables leading into it. Grant was springing toward me, his pistol at my head. But behind him Fersen, blood on his lips and on his breast, half raised himself, the pistol in his hand, speaking. At its crack Grant swayed, collapsed and fell, the black compact case at his belt that had preserved him breaking loose as he struck the floor. Fersen, leaning, had his dimming eyes upon me, striving to speak. I reached, grasped the cables, tore them once, twice, and then they had ripped loose. The white light of the disc inside the great projector vanished, and the mechanism that moved it ceased its clicking. The world atavism that had thrown the races of man back to the state that had been theirs eons before was ended at last. Fersen, his eyes on mine, seemed to smile feebly in approval. Then his body slipped quietly down, and he lay as motionless and silent as Grant. Afterward. I have been writing here in this silent room for a time, whose length I cannot guess. Westward, though the sun is touching the horizon, its level rays searching through this room, over the great projector and over Fersen and Grant lying silent before me. My life is ebbing swiftly from me with each passing minute. Yet with the age-old instinct of man strong in me, I have striven thus to leave a record of the great change, that men of the future in some far day may read. Men of the future, for there will be such, there must be such. The upward surge of evolutionary progress that has been interrupted, set back, here on Earth begins again its slow upward climb with the halting of this projector. The coming again of the evolution vibrations that are now playing on Earth again. Beneath me, in the silent city, there swarm the ape-like hordes that were once humanity. But through the coming ages they will climb up again through troglodyte and savage barbarian to man. And it is for those men of the far future that I've written with my last strength these words, as I record, and a warning that I shall enclose in the steel box beside me. A warning that their civilization be never cast back from man to brute as ours has been. And if God send that they heed that warning, none among them ever shall die as I die now, the last men of all men, looking down through the sunset into the familiar but infinitely strange city, where roam the hordes that once were men. Sunset, sunset for our civilization, our races, as for the earth. But dying, I know that after their passing there must come, with the slow upward climb of evolution, new races, new civilizations, as surely as after sunset and night must come the end.
End of track 21. Track 22. More scientists do science. In space. Ed reads Sci-fi, Volume 11.
This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
Story 11. The Immortals, by David Duncan. Chapter 1. Dr. Clarence Peccary was an objective man. His increasing irritation was caused, he realized, by the fear that his conscience was going to intervene between him and the vast fortune that was definitely within his grasp. Millions, billions. But he wanted to enjoy it. He didn't want to skulk through life, avoiding the eyes of everyone he met, particularly when his life might last for centuries. So he sat glowering at the rectangular screen that was located just above the control console of Roger Staghorn's great digital computer. At the moment, Peccary was ready to accuse Staghorn of having no conscience whatsoever. It was only through an act of scientific detachment that he reminded himself that Staghorn neither had the fortune to gain nor cared about gaining one. Staghorn's fulfillment was in Humanak, the name he'd given the electronic monster that presently claimed his full attention. He sat at the controls, his eyes luminous behind the magnification of his thick lenses, his lanky frame arched forward for a better view of Humanak's screen. Far from showing annoyance at what he saw, there was a positive leer on his face, as well there might be. On the screen was the full-color picture of a small park in what appeared to be the center of a medium-sized town. It was a shabby little park. Rags and tattered papers waggled indolently in the breeze. The grass was an unkempt, indifferent pattern of greens and browns, as though the caretaker took small pains in setting his sprinklers. Beyond the square was a church, its steeple listing dangerously, its windows broken and its heavy double doors sagging on their hinges. Staghorn's leers and Dr. Peccary's glowers were not for the scenery, however, but for the people who wandered aimlessly through the little park and along the street beyond, carefully avoiding the area beneath the leaning steeple. All of them were uniformly young, ranging from perhaps 17 at one extreme to no more than 30 at the other. When Dr. Peccary had first seen them, he cried out joyfully, "You see, Staghorn, all young, all handsome." Then he'd stopped talking as he studied those in the foreground more closely. Their clothing, to call it that, was most peculiar. It was rags. Here and there was a garment that bore a resemblance to a dress or jacket or pair of trousers, but for the most part the people simply had chunks of cloth wrapped around them in a most careless fashion. Several would have been arrested for indecent exposure had they appeared anywhere except on Humanak's screen. However, they seemed indifferent to this, and to all else. A singularly attractive girl in a costume that would have made a cretin blush didn't even get a second glance,
from a young Adonis who passed her on the walk. Nor did she bestow one on him. The park bench held more interest for her, so she sat down on it. Peccary studied her more closely, then straightened with a start.
"I'll be damned," he said. "That's Jenny Cheever."
Staghorn continued to leer at the girl. "So you know her?"
"I know her father. He owns the local variety store. She's only 20 today, and there she is 100 years from now. Not a day older."
"Only her image, Dr. Peccary," Staghorn murmured. "Only her image. But a very pretty one." Peccary came to his feet, unable to control his irritation any longer.
"I won't believe it," he said. "Somehow a piece of misfortune has been fed into that machine. Its calculations are all wrong."
Staghorn refused to be perturbed. "But you just said you recognized the girl on the bench. I'd say that Humanac has to be working with needlepoint accuracy to put recognizable people into a prediction."
"Then shift the scene. For all I know, this part of town was turned into an insane asylum 50 years from now."
The use of the past tense when speaking of a future event was not ungrammatical in the presence of Humanac.
"Do you have the volume up?"
"Certainly. Can't you hear the birds twittering?"
"But I can't hear anyone talking."
"Perhaps it's a day of silence." Staghorn took another long look at the girl on the park bench, and then turned to the controls, using the fine adjustment on the geographical locator. The screen flickered, blinked, and the scene changed. The two men studied it. "Recognize it?" said Staghorn.
Peccary gave an affirmative grunt. "That's the Jefferson Grammar School on Elm Street. I'm surprised it's still there. But Lord, as long as they haven't built a new one, you'd think they'd at least keep the old one repaired."
"Very shabby," Staghorn agreed. It was. Large areas of the exterior plaster had fallen away. Windows were shattered, and here and there the broken slats of Venetian blinds stuck through them. The shrubbery about the building was dead. Weeds had sprung up through the cracks in the asphalt in the big play yard. There was no sign of children.
"Where is everyone?" Peccary demanded. "You must have the time control set for a Sunday or holiday."
"It's Tuesday," Staghorn said. Then both were silent, because at that moment a child appeared, a boy of about 11. He burst from the schoolhouse door and ran across the cracked asphalt toward the playground, glancing back over his shoulder as though expecting pursuit. Reaching the play apparatus, he paused and looked around desperately. The metal standards for the swings were in place, but no swings hung from them. The fulcrums for the seesaws were there, but they held no wooden planks to permit teetering. The only piece of equipment that looked capable of affording pleasure was the slide. It was a small one, only about 6 feet high, obviously designed for toddlers and not for a boy of 11. Nonetheless, the boy headed for it eagerly. But he had hardly set foot upon the bottom step of the ladder when the schoolhouse door burst open a second time. A young woman charged toward him, shouting, "Paul! Get down from there! At once! Paul!" She was an attractive woman, but her voice held a note of panic. She ran so swiftly that Paul, whose ascent of the ladder was accelerated rather than retarded by her command, hadn't quite reached the top when she seized him around the legs and tried to drag him down.
"Please, Miss Terry,"
he pleaded desperately.
"Just this once. Let me go to the top. Let me slide down it just once."
"Get to the top!" Miss Terry was aghast.
"You could fall and kill yourself. Down you come this instant." "Just one time," Paul wailed. "Let me do it just once."
Miss Terry paid no heed to his anguished cries. She tugged at his legs while Paul clung to the handrails. But he was the weaker of the two, and in a few seconds Miss Terry had torn him loose and set him on the ground. Then, seizing him firmly by the hand, she led him back toward the schoolhouse. Paul went along, snivelling miserably. They entered the building, and the play yard was once more silent and deserted.
"By God, Staghorn," Peccary thundered, "you've doctored it. You've deliberately fed false information into Humanac's memory cells."
Staghorn turned to glare at the guest, his eyes flaming at the outrageous suggestion. "The only hypothetical element I fed into Humanac is your Y hormone, Dr. Peccary. You saw me do it. You watched me check the computer before we started."
"I refuse to believe that my Y hormone will bring about the consequences that machine is predicting."
"It's the only new factor that was added."
"How can you say that? During the next 100 years, 1,000 other factors can enter in."
"But the Y hormone bears an essential relationship to the whole. Sit down and stop waving your arms. I'm going to see if I can get into the school. Peccary sat down, seething. It had been a mistake to bring his Y hormone to Staghorn. It was simply that he had been thinking of himself as such a benefactor to the human race that he couldn't wait to see a sample of the bright future he intended to create.
"Think of it, Staghorn,"
it said happily, earlier in the evening.
"The phrase, 'art is long and time is fleeting,' won't mean anything anymore. Artists will have hundreds of years to paint their pictures. Think of the books that will be written, the music that will be composed, the magnificent cities that will be built. Everyone will have time enough to achieve perfection. Think of your work and mine. We'll live long enough to unravel all the mysteries of the universe."
Staghorn had said nothing. Instead, he had uncorked the small bottle Dr. Peccary had given him and sniffed at it. The bottle contained a sample of the Y hormone which Dr. Peccary had spent many years developing. Its principal ingredient was a glandular extract from insects, an organic compound that controlled the insect's aging process. If administered artificially, it could keep insects in the larval stage almost indefinitely. Dr. Peccary's great contribution had been to synthesize this extract, which affected only insects, with protein elements that could be assimilated by mammals and humans. It had required years of experimentation, but the result was his Y hormone, Y for youth. In his laboratory he now had playful kittens that were 6 years old, and puppies that should have been fully grown dogs. The only human he'd so far experimented on was himself, but because he'd started taking the hormone only recently, he was as yet unable to say positively that it was responsible for the splendid health he was enjoying. His impatience to know the sociological consequences of the hormone had made him bring a sample of it to Staghorn. After sniffing at the bottle, Staghorn had poured its contents into Humanac's analyzer. The giant computer gurgled and belched a few seconds while it assessed the nature of the formula. Then Staghorn connected the analyzer with the machine's memory units. As far as Humanac was concerned, the Y hormone was now an accepted part of human history. But except for this one added factor, the rest of Humanac's vast memory was solidly based upon the complete known history of the Earth and the human race. Its principles of operation were the same as those controlling other electronic brains, which could be programmed to predict tides, weather, election results, or the state of a department store inventory at any given date in the future. Humanac differed chiefly in the tremendously greater capacity of its memory cells. Over the years it had digested thousands of books, codifying and coordinating the information as fast as it was received. Its photocells had recorded millions of visual impressions. Its auditory units had absorbed the music and languages of the centuries. And its methods of evaluation had been given a strictly human touch by feeding into its resistance chambers the cephalic wave patterns produced by the brains of Staghorn's colleagues. An added feature, though by no means an original one, was the screen upon which Humanac produced visually the events of the time and place for which the controls were set. This screen was simply the big end of a cathode ray tube, similar to those used in television sets. It was adapted from IBM's 704 electronic computer, used by the Vanguard Tracking Center to produce visual predictions of the orbits of artificial satellites. Staghorn was constantly having trouble explaining to people that Humanac was not a time machine that could look into the past or future. Its pictures of future events were predictions calculated according to the laws of probability. But because Humanac, unlike a human, never forgot any of the 1,000,001 variables impinging upon any human situation, its predictions were startlingly accurate. Humanac had never been exposed to pictures of Dr. Peccary's hometown, nor to those of a girl named Jenny Cheever. It arrived at the likeness of both town and girl through a purely mathematical process. Staghorn's ultimate purpose in building the machine was to use it in developing a true science of history. Because Humanac was only a machine, Staghorn could alter its memory at will. By removing the tiny unit upon which the Battle of Hastings was recorded, and then replaying English history without it, he could find out what actual effect that particular battle had. He was surprised to discover that it had very little. According to Humanac, the Normans would have conquered England anyway a few months later. At another time, while reviewing the events leading up to the American Revolution, Humanac had produced a picture of Benjamin Franklin kissing a beautiful young woman in the office of his printing shop. On impulse, Staghorn removed this seemingly insignificant event from Humanac's memory, and then turned the time dial forward to the present to see what effect, if any, the episode had had upon history. To his amazement, with that single kiss missing, Humanac produced a picture of the American continent composed of 6 different nations, speaking French, German, Chinese, Hindu, Arabic, and Muskogean, the last being the language of an Indian nation occupying the Mississippi Valley and extending northward to Lake Winnipeg. It served as a buffer state between the Hindus and Chinese in the west, and the French, Germans, and Arabs to the east. It was Humanac's ability to predict the future consequences of any hypothetical event, however, that made it an instrument capable of revolutionizing history. Once its dependability was thoroughly established, it would be possible for a Secretary of State to submit to Humanac the contents of a note intended for a foreign country, then turn the time controls ahead and get Humanac's prediction of the note's consequences. If the consequences were good, the note would then be sent. If they were bad, the Secretary could destroy the note and try others until he composed one that produced the desired result. Humanac's flaw was that it had no way of explaining the predictions produced on its screen. It merely showed what would happen when, and if certain things were done. It left it up to the human operator to figure out why things happened that way. This was what was troubling Dr. Peccary. He could not see the remotest relationship between his Y hormone and the fact that a mathematical probability named Miss Terry should refuse another mathematical probability named Paul permission to climb to the top of a 6-foot playground slide. Meanwhile, Staghorn had been using the fine adjustment on the geographic locator and now grunted his satisfaction. Good, we're in the building at least. On the screen was a dusky corridor. On either side of it were classroom doors, some closed, some ajar. Staghorn moved his hand from the fine adjustment to the even more deliberate vernier control, which permitted him to shift the geographic focus inches at a time. The focus drifted slowly forward to one of the half-open doors, and then he and Dr. Peccary were able to see into the classroom. It was deserted. Desks were thick with dust. Books, yellow with age, were strewn on the floor. Staghorn's hand sought the vernier control again. The picture led them on down the corridor to another open door. Again it was a scene of desolation. "This can have nothing to do with my Y hormone," Peccary insisted. "Why is your picture on the wall there?" Staghorn said, with a note of malicious pleasure. Dr. Peccary looked and started. On the classroom wall was a faded photograph of himself. Except that he was wearing a different suit in the picture, he looked just as he looked at the present moment. Staghorn got a closer focus on the photograph, so that Peccary could read the legend beneath it. Dr. Clarence Peccary, the man who gave the world the Y hormone. "All right, then," said Peccary, somewhat mollified by this tribute. "If they put my picture on schoolroom walls 100 years from now, it means I'm an honored man, a man the world admires, and therefore the Y hormone can't be the cause of all this desolation." "I found that Humanac's reasoning and human reasoning differ in many ways," said Staghorn. On the screen they were out in the corridor again, when from somewhere ahead came a woman's voice. "You may recite now, Paul. Please stand up." "Ah, that sounds like Miss Terry," said Staghorn. He fingered the vernier control. The focal point slid forward along the corridor. "Stand up and recite, Paul," Miss Terry said more sharply. "I think they're in the room on the left," said Peccary. End of track 22. Track 23.
More scientists do science. In space.
Ed reads Sci-fi, Volume 11. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Story 11. The Immortals, by David Duncan. Chapter 2. The focus shifted to the open door, and then Peccary and Staghorn could see into the classroom. This one was in slightly better order than the others, and was occupied by 2 people. In front sat Miss Terry, obviously the teacher, and at one of the desks sat Paul. He seemed to be the entire class. At Miss Terry's urging, he was coming to his feet, his face still stained with tears. He held his book a few inches from his nose and stared over the top of it, sullenly. "Go ahead, Paul," said Miss Terry, sweetly, stubborn. "I'm waiting." Paul looked at his book and read from it in a monotone, enunciating each word carefully, as though it had no relationship to the other words. "I am a human being, and as long as I obey the 6 rules, I shall live forever." "Very good, Paul. Now read the 6 rules." Paul sniffled loudly and commenced reading again. "Rule 1. I must never go near fire, or my clothing may catch aflame and burn me up. Rule 2. I must keep away from deep water, or I may fall in and drown. Rule 3. I must stay away from high places, or I may fall and dash my brains out." He paused to sniffle and wipe his nose on his sleeve, then sighed and continued dismally. "Rule 4. I must never play with sharp things, or I may cut myself and bleed to death. Rule 5. I must never ride horses, or I may fall off and break my neck." Paul paused, lowering his book. "And the 6th rule?" said Miss Terry. "Go ahead and read the 6th rule." Reluctantly, Paul lifted his book. "Rule 6. Starting when I'm 21, I must take Dr. Peccary's Y hormone once a week to keep me young and healthy forever." "Excellent, Paul," said Miss Terry. "And which rule were you breaking just now on the playground?" "I was breaking Rule 3, Paul said, then quoted sadly, "I must stay away from high places, or I may fall and dash my brains out." Dr. Peccary was on his feet, stomping around in front of the computer. "Sheer idiocy," he muttered. "He doesn't have any brains to dash out. I'll admit that a computer with sufficient information about the state of the world might be able to make accurate predictions of events a few months, or possibly a year into the future, but not 100 years. In that long an interval, even the most trivial error could distort every circuit in the machine." He jabbed a finger toward the screen where Paul was seated at his desk again. "And that's why that picture is a distortion. I'm not going to let it influence me one bit in what I intend to—" He broke off because of what was happening on the screen. From somewhere outside the school building came the wail of a deep-throated alarm. Both Miss Terry and Paul were on their feet, and by their expressions, terrified. "The Atavars!" Paul cried, his entire body shaking. "To the basement, Paul!" Miss Terry's face was blanched as she grasped Paul's hand and headed toward the door. But halfway there, both came to a halt, breathless and staring. A powerful, bearded man strode into the classroom. Paul and Miss Terry fell back as he advanced. He was a man of about 50, his bushy hair shot with grey, his eyes cold and blue. He was followed by 2 younger men who studied Paul and Miss Terry with interest. All 3 wore rough work clothing. The bearded man pointed at Paul.
"There's the boy,"
he said quietly.
"Take him."
Paul let out a shriek of terror and fled into a corner as the 2 men advanced. He clawed futilely as they laid hands on him.
"For God's sake, shut up,"
one of the men said with more disgust than anger. He pinioned Paul's arms while the other man bound them together with a strip of cloth. Miss Terry, meanwhile, had collapsed into her chair. One of Paul's captors glanced at her and spoke to the bearded man.
"What about her?"
The bearded man stepped closer to Miss Terry and put a hand on her shoulder. She recoiled, as from a snake.
"How old are you?"
he asked. Miss Terry made some inarticulate squeaks, and the man spoke more sharply.
"When were you born?"
2004,
she managed to stutter. The bearded man considered this and shook his head.
"Over 50. By that time, they're hopeless. Leave her and bring the boy."
Miss Terry let out an agonized wail of protest and fainted across her desk. One of the men slung Paul over his shoulder, and the bearded leader led the group from the room.
"Amazing," murmured Staghorn. "Absolutely amazing. One never knows what to expect."
"Pure gibberish,"
said Peccary.
then betrayed his interest by saying, "Can you follow them?"
"I'm trying to."
Stackon worked at the geographic adjustment and finally got the screen focused on the corridor again. It was deserted. The bearded man and his companions had already departed. Stackon touched the controls again. The screen flickered, and once more the little park came into focus. By now it, too, was deserted. None of the ragged men and women were in sight, neither in the park nor on the street beyond. Staghorn twisted the focus in all directions without discovering anyone.
"That whistle we heard was obviously some kind of alarm," he said. "Everyone must be in hiding. From the Atavars, whoever they are. I strongly suspect that bearded fellow of being one."
"You might as well shut it off, Staghorn," Dr. Peccary said coldly. "It's too much nonsense for any sane man to swallow, and unless that machine can provide a full and satisfactory explanation as to why my Y hormone will bring about the conditions depicted on that screen, I see no reason to keep the hormone off the market."
"There'll be plenty who will."
"That's what Humanac says, yes."
Dr. Peccary gestured despairingly. After all, he did have a conscience.
"I simply don't believe my hormone can be responsible."
"I remind you that your picture was on the classroom wall, and that the 6th rule read by that boy indicated that he was supposed to start using your hormone when he reached the age of 21. That will be about the age to stop growing older."
"That boy is nothing but a mathematical probability."
"That's all you and I are," Staghorn said, owlishly. "Mathematical probabilities. Despite Omar, nothing exactly like either of us has ever existed before, or will exist again."
"But damn it, Staghorn!"
Dr. Peccary sat down, his face in his hands.
"It's worth millions. I've invested years of work, and all the money I could scrape together. I don't see anything wrong in a scientist's profiting by his discoveries. And to keep it off the market just because that insane computer says that 100 years from now—"
He broke off, glaring at Humanac's screen, which was still focused on the deserted park.
"It simply doesn't make sense. The machine doesn't give any reasons for anything. If there were a way I could talk directly to some of those mathematical probabilities, question them, ask them what it's all about—"
He was on his feet, striding back and forth before the computer again.
"Perhaps there is a way," Staghorn said quietly.
"Eh?"
"I said that it may be possible for you to talk with them."
"How?"
"By making your mind a temporary part of the computer."
Peccary studied the huge machine apprehensively. Its ranks of memory units, its chambers of flickering tubes, the labyrinth of circuits.
"How would you go about it?"
"I put you in the transmitter," Staghorn said.
He stepped away from the console and slid back a panel to reveal a niche with a seat in it. Above the seat was a sort of helmet that resembled a hairdryer in a beauty parlor, except that it was studded with hundreds of tiny magnets and transistors. Staghorn indicated the helmet.
"This picks up and amplifies brain waves. I've used it to record the cephalic wave pattern of about 100 men and women. The recordings are built into the computer, enabling Humanac to assign a mathematical evaluation to the influence of human emotion in making historic decisions. In your case, instead of making a recording of your brainwave, I'd feed the impulses directly to Humanac's memory units."
"And what would happen then?"
"I'm not altogether sure," said Staghorn,
and it seemed to Peccary that Staghorn was finding a definite relish in his uncertainty.
"I've never tried the experiment before."
"I might get electrocuted."
"No, there's no danger of that happening. The current that activates the transmitter comes from your own brain, and as you know, such electrical impulses are extremely feeble. That isn't what worries me."
"Well then, what does?"
"In some ways, Humanac behaves peculiarly like a living organism. For example, there's one prediction it can never make. Several times I've fed into it the hypothetical information that the two opposing factions of the world have declared war. Naturally, everyone would like to know about the outcome of such a war."
Staghorn paused, gazing lovingly at his majestic creation.
"And what happens?"
Dr. Peccary said impatiently.
"Nothing. That's just it. The moment I turn Humanac into the future to get a prediction, the screen goes dead. Do you know why it goes dead?"
Staghorn looked at Peccary with a pleased smile and didn't wait for Peccary to cue him.
"It goes dead because, if war were declared, Humanac would be the first target for enemy bombs. When it predicts a future event, it has to take all factors into consideration. If one of those factors is its own destruction,
It can predict nothing beyond that moment. Peccary repeated the sentence in his mind while he slowly digested its meaning. What it seemed to mean was that, although Starcon and Peccary thought of Humanak as only a complicated machine, Humanak's opinion of itself was altogether otherwise. It could foresee its own death. "I often wonder," mused Starcon, "about those people we see wandering around on Humanak's screen. To us, they're only images made by a stream of electrons hitting the end of a cathode ray tube. The space and time is an illusion. All the same, Humanak comprises an entire system, a system modeled as accurately as possible on our own. It's just possible that the boy we saw, Paul, was experiencing a real terror." Dr. Peccary examined Starcon in amazement. He had often suggested that Starcon's genius was tinged with madness. "You're not suggesting that those images are conscious?" "Ah, what is consciousness?" "I didn't come here to get into a metaphysical argument." "No, but it's only fair for me to suggest the possible emotional hazards involved in hooking you up to Humanak. Because you have to admit that you'll be conscious during the experiment." "Certainly, but I'll be sitting right there." Peccary pointed to the seat in the transmitter unit. "In a sense, yes." "Very well, take your seat." Peccary eyed the helmet uneasily. "I'm not sure I want to do this." "But you do want to make millions from the Y hormone, and you want to enjoy it with a clear conscience. Perhaps it's as you say. There may be other factors involved. By knowing what they are, you may be able to negate their influence." Starcon's voice was a soft purr as he took Dr. Peccary's arm and urged him into the transmitter unit. Peccary sat down. The seat was small and hard. "Just bear one thing in mind," Starcon said. "Don't get lost. It will be best if you stay in the little park where I can see you, and where you'll be in focus. Unless you're in focus, it might be impossible to disengage you." Dr. Peccary could find no meaning whatsoever in this statement, except confirmation of his suspicion that Starcon was mad. He felt this so strongly that he started to rise from his seat and escape from the transmitter cell. But at that moment, Starcon lowered the helmet onto his head. The sensation he experienced was so novel and startling that he remained seated. For a second or two, he could feel the tiny metallic contacts on the inside of the helmet pressing against his skull, but this sensation of physical pressure vanished almost at once. It was replaced by one of headlessness. His body, up to his chin, still seemed to be sitting in the transmitter, but his intellect had lost completely its sense of localization in the head. He could think clearly enough, but had no notion as to the spot where his thoughts originated. Indeed, the whole concept of relative position seemed ridiculous. At the same instant, he felt tall as a mountain and as low as a rug. His mind could fill the entire universe, while resting neatly in a thimble. He could also see Starcon, for his eyes continued to function and transmit optical patterns, but precisely where he was while receiving these patterns he couldn't possibly say. He heard Starcon remark, "Fine, the connection is perfect. It's always better when the subject is bald. I'm going to switch you over into Humanak circuits now." Starcon's hand moved across the controls, and one of his long fingers flipped a switch. This was the last Dr. Peccary saw of Roger Starcon. Instantly, he found himself standing in the center of the small park in his hometown. His reaction was not one of alarm. Quite to the contrary. His immediate thought was one of surprise that he wasn't alarmed. Standing there in the little square felt entirely normal and proper. Next, he was jolted by the realization that he must be an image on Humanak's screen. He quickly looked about in all directions, half expecting to see Starcon's huge face peering down from the sky, like God. There was no sign of Starcon, however. The world about him was as three-dimensional as any he'd ever known. He was in his hometown, 100 years after he'd last seen it. Good Lord, he was 142 years old. This realization was followed by a host of others. Like a man coming out of amnesia, his past began filling with memories. He was rich. He was the richest man on earth. His Y hormone was used the world over. A mile away in the outskirts of town, he could see a portion of his huge production plant. He lived in a majestic palace, surrounded by every manner of automatic protective device. Protection? From what? And how had he dared to venture out here in the park alone? But wait. It was all an illusion. Actually, he was only an image on Humanac's screen, a mathematical probability. He must keep that fact firmly in mind, or he might lose his mental balance. He gazed about at the town, dismayed by its appearance. Not a person in sight, not even an automobile. Of course, the motor car might have become obsolete during the passage of 100 years. There must be some new mode of transportation, something undreamed of a century ago. While he was wondering what this might be, he heard a clop, clop, clopping, and was astonished to see 3 horsemen approaching the square. As they came closer, he recognized them as bearded men, and his 2 companions. The boy Paul was bound firmly behind one of the saddles. A strange panic arose in Dr. Peccary's breast, but he managed to suppress it with the reminder that this was all an illusion. He was here for purposes of information. He must have the courage to get it. So he forced himself to the curb at the edge of the park. When the riders were within speaking distance, he managed to hail them with, "Hey, you!" His nervousness made his words harsh, but then there was no reason why he should speak politely to kidnappers. He saw that Paul was conscious. The boy had a gag over his mouth, but his eyes were open. The 3 riders reined in their horses and looked at Peccary with frank curiosity. "There's one that didn't hide," one of them remarked, in a tone that Dr. Peccary decided was disrespectful. He stepped forward boldly. "May I ask what you intend to do with that boy?" he demanded. "He wants to know what we intend to do with the boy," said the same man.
"Yes, I heard what he said,"
the bearded man remarked quietly. He hadn't ceased to study Peccary with his piercing blue eyes. Now he urged his horse closer.
"You must be a stranger here, son."
"Not exactly," said Peccary. "As a matter of fact, I was born here. That was some time ago, and it's true I haven't been here recently."
The way the bearded man stared at him made him extremely nervous.
"But I'm sure that kidnapping is against the law. If you don't release that boy, I'll have to make a citizen's arrest."
Peccary knew that his words sounded ridiculous. From the way the 3 riders exchanged glances, it was evident that they thought the same thing. "It's going to make a citizen's arrest," commented the one who liked to repeat whatever Peccary said.
"Hush,"
said the bearded leader, and then to Peccary,
"What's your name, son?"
"Clarence Peccary.
If you don't do as I say, I'll—" He stopped short, his heart leaping as the force of his indiscretion struck him. The 3 men had been struck also. The 2 younger ones were already on the ground, one on either side of him. Only the bearded man remained mounted. He leaned forward.
"I thought you looked familiar. You're Dr. Peccary of the Y hormone."
His voice was a menacing whisper. Peccary finally answered with a slow nod.
"He must have flipped, running around alone like this,"
the man beside him said.
"However, let's never insult fortune."
This is the last Dr. Peccary heard, for at that instant one of the men, he never knew which, struck him forcibly over the head with a blunt instrument. End of track 23. Track 24.
More scientists do science. In space.
Red Reads Sci-fi, Volume 11. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Story 11. The Immortals, by David Duncan. Chapter 3. At Humanac's controls, Roger Steichorn leaped to his feet in alarm as he saw what was happening on the screen. Peccary had collapsed now. The 2 men were draping him across the bearded man's saddle. There wasn't an instant to lose. Steichorn leaped to the transmitter cell where Peccary's material body was seated, his eyes peacefully closed. Steichorn flipped the switch to disengage Peccary's consciousness from Humanac's circuits. Nothing happened. Peccary's body remained as before, blissfully asleep. Good Lord, of course nothing happened. How could it? Peccary had just been knocked cold. At the moment he didn't have any consciousness. Staghorn opened the circuit again and whirled back to the control console. He looked at the screen. All 3 men were mounted again. The bearded leader gestured them on. They set spurs to their horses and galloped away, taking the unconscious Peccary with them. "No," Staghorn shouted to the fleeing images. "No, Dr. Peccary, stay in focus." The horsemen paid no heed, nor did Staghorn expect them to, rationally. His shouts were only involuntary expressions of despair. Grasping the geographic locator, he twiddled it wildly, managing to keep the 3 riders in focus for several blocks as they sped down a street of the deserted town. Then they rounded a corner, and he lost them. By the time he got a focus on the area around the corner, they were gone. For several minutes he continued to search, shifting the focal point all over town, but in vain. Dr. Clarence Peccary was lost inside Humanac's labyrinthine brain. Staghorn was stunned. There would be no difficulty in keeping Peccary's physical body alive indefinitely by intravenous feeding, but it was as good as dead while separated from its sense of identity. Worse yet were the probable consequences to Humanac of having a free soul loose in its mathematical universe. These were too dire to contemplate. The machine's reliability might be altogether ruined, and Staghorn's life work destroyed. Under the circumstances, there was but one course of action. He had to find Dr. Peccary and get him back into focus so that he could be disengaged from the computer. First, Staghorn focused the geographic locator on the town square, the point from which Peccary had been abducted. From there, he could begin tracking him. Next, he set the time control so that it would automatically disengage the transmitter units in exactly 3 hours. Whether or not he could find Dr. Peccary in that period of time, Staghorn had no way of knowing, but at least he should be able to get himself back into focus at the proper moment. Then, in case he had failed to find Peccary, he could reset the time clock and try again. Next, he opened a second transmitter unit, sat down on the little seat, and pulled the helmet down on his head. As sensations of vastness and lost dimensions spread through him, he reached out and pressed down the switch that would pour his own brain impulses into Humanac's circuits. Instantly, as with Dr. Peccary, Staghorn found himself standing in the little park. He examined his hands and slapped his sides a few times, taking time to assimilate the fact that he felt pretty solid. Bishop Berkeley was right all the time. The universe was subjective, a creation of consciousness. He left all these speculations and recalled himself to his mission. Glancing around, he saw that people were beginning to reappear. They came up from basements and out of the doors of the dilapidated houses and buildings. If there had been a panic, there was no sign of it now. The men and women moved indolently, returning toward the park and the sunlit streets. All were so much the same age and of such similar beauty that it was difficult to distinguish individual members of the same sex. But he finally recognized the girl Dr. Peccary had identified as Jenny Cheever. She had an attractive strawberry birthmark on her hip. She strolled back into the park, accompanied by a young man. The 2 of them took possession of the bench where Jenny had been seated earlier. They sat well apart from each other, silently contemplating the other passers-by. Feeling that his knowledge of Jenny's name constituted a sort of introduction, Staghorn approached the couple. The man paid no attention to him, but Jenny watched him curiously. Staghorn was not a man over whom women swooned, and it occurred to him that she found something odd about his dark suit and thick spectacles. He seemed to be the only man in town wearing either. "How do you do?" he said to her. "I believe you're Ben Cheever's daughter." She continued to examine him languidly, slowly stroking a heavy strand of her auburn hair. "Am I?" she said at last. "It's been so long I've forgotten. But then it had to be someone's daughter, and since my name is Cheever, you may be right. I don't remember you. We must have met ages and ages ago." "This is the first time we've met. You were pointed out to me by a friend." She considered this with a puzzled air, and idly curious said, "Do you want to marry me?" "Good heavens, no." Jenny didn't seem to be insulted by his abruptness. "I just wondered why you'd speak to me," she said. "Because if you want to marry me, you have to wait. I've promised to marry him first." She gestured to the man on the bench with her. The man looked at Staghorn for the first time. "Yeah," he said. "I see," said Staghorn. "And when is this merry event to take place?" Someday, Jenny said indifferently. When we both feel like it. There's no use rushing things. I don't want to use up all the men too soon. Use them up. He'll be my 25th husband.
Yeah, said the man. She'll be my 32nd wife. Your marriages can't last very long, said Staghorn. Despite the physical attractiveness of both Jenny and her escort, Staghorn began to feel clammy in their presence. He had an impression of deep ill health, a sense of unclean, almost reptilian lassitude. They get shorter all the time, said Jenny, and turned away as though the conversation bored her. The man, too, had lost interest. Staghorn stood, ignored for a moment, and then spoke bluntly. Who are the avatars? The word produced the first genuine reaction. Jenny leaped to her feet. The man turned red. Don't say that word, Jenny said. I'm sorry, I'm a stranger. No one can be that much of a stranger. It's indecent, the man said. He stood up and touched Jenny's arm. I feel my blood pounding. Let's go get married. Jenny nodded, and with a cold glance at Staghorn moved away with her companion. Staghorn was tempted to follow and demand an answer to his question when he saw Miss Terry approaching. Miss Terry was more likely to have the information he needed, and in any case, since she was only in her 50s, she was less than half of Jenny Cheever's age. He hoped this would make a difference in her attitude. That she was capable of emotion he already knew. Her expression as she approached was disconsolate. Staghorn bowed low before her and introduced himself. Good afternoon, Miss Terry. I'm a stranger to you, but since you're a teacher by profession, you may have heard of me. I'm Dr. Roger Staghorn. He straightened, twisted his lips into a smile, and waited for Miss Terry to associate his name with those scientific achievements that he had so startled the world 100 years earlier. To his chagrin, Miss Terry only gazed at him blankly and shook her head. No, she murmured. Then tears formed in her eyes as she tried to move on. Staghorn stopped her. Forgive me, he said. I'm aware of your recent loss. Your pupil, Paul. Her tears dropped more freely. Sooner or later, I knew I'd get him. The only child in town. And now I've nothing to do. Nothing at all. They? Just who are they? The Atavars? Miss Terry turned pale. Don't say it, she pleaded. In time I'll forget. But where have they taken Paul, and what will they do with him? He'll die, of course. She spoke these words almost indifferently, then wept copiously as she added, But I'll live on with nothing to do. Then why didn't someone stop them? He gestured angrily at the handsome young males wandering through the park. All these men. Why don't they rescue Paul? This suggestion so shocked Miss Terry that she stopped weeping. That's impossible. There'll be violence. Someone might get killed. They think of that with a boy's life at stake? Staghorn felt his rage rising. He was an irascible man by nature, and he had controlled himself so far only because he knew he was part of an illusion. The sense of illusion was fading rapidly, however. The guiding principles of morals and ethics were themselves abstractions, and therefore operated just as powerfully in an abstract universe. He grasped Miss Terry by the arm. I'll go after him myself. Where do I find them? You can't find them. If you follow, they'll capture you too. I'll chance that. Where are they gone? I can't tell you. They might punish me. Staghorn shook her heartily, ignoring the fact that she was over 50. Tell me. It so happens that besides Paul, they've captured Dr. Clarence Peccary, and I'm responsible for his life. At this statement, Miss Terry let out a cry of horror. They've caught Dr. Peccary. No, no. They must certainly have, so hurry up and tell me. We'll all die, wailed Miss Terry. We'll all die. In that case, it can't hurt you to tell me. The mountains, cried Miss Terry. High Canyon. It was with great difficulty that Staghorn forced directions from her. The news of Peccary's capture had unsettled her entirely. But despite the roughness with which he was forced to use her, no one came to her rescue. Several young men and women gathered at a safe distance to watch, but they did nothing to interfere. Staghorn finally elicited the information that High Canyon was several miles north of town, and could be reached by following a dirt road. To his inquiry as to where he could rent a car, Miss Terry went blank again. There were no cars.
They had been abolished before Miss Terry was born. She thought there might be one in the museum. Staghorn glanced at his watch. He'd already been in the transmitter 30 minutes. He had only 2.5 hours to get to High Canyon, rescue Dr. Peccary and Paul, and return to the square. He dared not cut it too fine. He'd have to be back with a few minutes to spare. So after learning the location of the museum, he took off at a run. It was evident that at some period in the past the town had gone through a surge of prosperity, for there were several quite majestic buildings whose cornerstones bore dates of the late 20th century. But it was also clear that during the last 50 years, not only had few new enterprises been started, but the old ones had been allowed to languish. The museum even lacked an attendant at the door, unless one gave this title to the bust of Dr. Peccary, which stood on a pedestal just inside the entrance. The plaque beneath the bust noted that Dr. Peccary had given the museum to the city in 1985 to preserve for our immortal posterity a true picture of the world of mortals. In the 7.5 decades since, however, this true picture had suffered badly. In the absence of curtains and draperies, and in the nudeness of the mannequins whose purpose could only have been to display 20th century costumes, Staghorn gained a hint as to where the populace got at least a part of the rags they wore. He didn't pause to examine details, however. A wall directory with a faded map of the building had given him the location of the wing of 20th century machines. He headed there at once, passing by displays of tractors, bulldozers, jackhammers, and other commonplaces, before reaching the automobiles. There was an excellent selection of standard and sports models, all a uniform grey under their coats of dust, and all of them out of gas. After so long a time, it was doubtful if any would have run anyway. He had simply hoped that one lone attendant might have kept one in working condition. In the next room, however, he found the reward for his effort. Bicycles. He chose a racing model. A few minutes later he was pedaling rapidly northward on the dirt road that led to High Canyon. End of Track 24. Track 25.
More scientists do science in space.
Ed Reed Sci-fi, Volume 11. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Story 11. The Immortals, by David Duncan. Chapter 4. Dr. Peccary could feel fingers probing at his sore head. A bit of damp cloth or cotton was pressed against his upper lip. The sharp odor that stabbed his nostrils made him jerk his head away and suck in his breath.
Good, he's coming around.
Dr. Peccary opened his eyes. For a few seconds, faces and objects swung around him giddily, but finally the environment achieved stability. He saw that he was in a log cabin, on a bunk. Seated in a chair beside him was a man whose manner could belong only to a doctor. Standing behind the doctor was the bearded man. "He'll be all right," the doctor said, packing bottles and probes into his little black bag. Dr. Peccary sat up and touched the back of his head gingerly. It was very, very sore. He'd never had an illusion quite like this before. Besides, the illusion had persisted too long. How long had he been out? Hours? Days? Good Lord, had Staghorn deserted him? The bearded man ushered the doctor out, locked the door, and came back to observe Peccary. He put a booted foot on the chair and leaned an elbow on his knee.
"I hardly need tell you, Dr. Peccary,"
he said,
"that this is the happiest day of my life."
"But not of mine," Peccary responded sourly. "I doubt if you could make it a bit worse by telling me what this is all about and what you plan to do with me."
The bearded man showed surprise.
"You don't know?"
"No, I don't know."
Peccary was losing his detachment. The bearded man considered him thoughtfully.
"I shouldn't have let the doctor go so soon. Apparently you were hit harder than we thought. On the other hand, it's just possible, living as you have these last 70 years locked up in your palace and isolated from the rest of the world, that you've lost touch with what is going on."
"I've lost touch with a great many things. Obviously I'm a prisoner. How long is this going to last?"
"Only until my demolition squad is ready. Then we take you to your production plant, where you produce the Y hormone. There will be a gun at your back, of course. You know the combination to get us safely past the automatic guards. I've waited all my life for this. Once we're in the plant, my men will do the rest.
You're going to blow it up?
Absolutely.
And what do you gain by that? The formula for the Y hormone still exists.
The bearded man laughed.
Yes, I can see you've been out of touch with the world. It's been 30 years since the country produced anyone capable of working with that formula. That's when the last university closed down, 30 years ago.
Shocking, said Dr. Peccary. But my experiment showed conclusively that the Y hormone has no deleterious effect upon intelligence. I took every precaution.
Nothing wrong with anyone's intelligence,
said the bearded man.
Except that no one's under pressure to use it. When the future stretches on indefinitely, it gets easier and easier to put things off until tomorrow, even education, until finally it's put off forever. There's only one man living who understands that formula.
And who is that?
The bearded man looked down at him hatefully.
Yourself, Dr. Peccary. That's why you were so delighted to capture you, because now you'll never use it again.
Peccary stared at him aghast.
I understand now. You mean to steal it. You mean to force it out of me and start producing the Y hormone yourself.
This accusation resulted in a violent reaction from the bearded man. He grasped Peccary by the lapels of his jacket and hauled him to his feet. Peccary could feel the man's powerful hands trembling with rage.
You fool! You utter imbecile! Don't you even yet know who we are?
Peccary was so throttled by the man's clutch that he could only waggle his head in the negative. The bearded man's face came close to his.
We're mortals.
He flung Peccary back on the bunk contemptuously.
We accept our allotted span of years and call it quits. But during that time we live. We have to. It's all the time we have.
He glared at Peccary a moment before resuming in a milder tone.
After we destroy your production plant, Dr. Peccary, we're going to kill you. You might as well know. It's the only way to make certain the formula for the Y hormone will never be used again.
Then he smiled.
But take consolation. With the plant destroyed, you'd gradually get old and die anyway. For the brief period before we execute you, you might even regain an appreciation for life.
He bent suddenly, gripped Peccary's wrist, and hauled him to his feet again.
In fact, you might have forgotten what life is. I'll refresh your memory. Come along.
He dragged Peccary to the door, opened it, and let him outside. Peccary looked around. He found himself on the level floor of a canyon, whose vertical walls rose high on either side. He recognized the place at once. Often when he was a boy, he had come here to camp overnight. It had been a delightful wilderness with a year-round stream. The canyon had changed. Some 40 cabins like the one he'd been in were built in the shade of the southern cliff, and the canyon floor was covered with green crops and pasture. He heard singing, laughter. People were at work in the fields. Children were building rock castles at the base of the cliff. On a cabin porch, 2 elderly men sat playing checkers.
The last of the mortals,
said the bearded man.
If there are any other colonies, we don't know of them. But when you're gone, Dr. Peccary, they'll be the first of a new race. You asked earlier what we intended to do with the boy we kidnapped. There he is.
And he pointed toward the canyon wall. Peccary looked and saw Paul climbing upward along crevices and ledges. The bearded man kept his hands to his mouth and shouted,
Paul, how is it?
The boy straightened on a rocky pinnacle and looked back. His face was ecstatic.
I'm climbing, he crowed. I've never been so high. I'm climbing all the way to the top.
He waved and clambered on.
Once in a great while a child is born to one of the immortals,
the bearded man said.
If we find him in time, we can save him.
Peccary watched the boy move upward along the cliff.
And why was he so terrified when you captured him?
Because it had pounded into him that if the Atavars got him, he'd die. He will, too, eventually, like any other mortal. But in the meanwhile...
He broke off and turned on Peccary savagely.
You see, there's only one thing you didn't consider at all. The Y hormone stops aging and keeps people healthy, but it can't protect them from accidents. The Immortals can still die if they get hit by a train or fall overboard in the middle of the ocean. A mortal can accept the possibility of accidental death because he knows he's going to die anyway sooner or later. But can't you see the psychological shock to the Immortals when one of them dies? A man who had the potential of living forever suddenly wiped out. It's like the end of the world. And so they started eliminating hazards. Automobiles went first, then planes and trains. They were needed anyway, because people stopped traveling. To travel is to cause accident, but one precaution breeds another, and before long people were avoiding all dangerous occupations. With immortality at stake, even the smallest risk was too much. Planing mills, machine shops, mines, smelters, bah! Name me an occupation that doesn't occasionally entail some hazard, even motherhood.
But I anticipated the need for birth control. I had the plans all set up.
There was birth control all right, but not the way you planned it. 10 years after your hormone went on the market, the world had an extra 5 billion people. For a few years they produced a surge of energy, until the older Immortals started eliminating the hazards. After that, starvation set in. 3/4 of the population died. Your hormone can't keep people from starving either, and it was a shock from which those who survived never recovered. Every new mouth to feed was a threat. Childbirth practically stopped, but that left the remaining Immortals in a very soft position. For years now they've been existing on the leftovers from civilization, finding shelter in the old houses, ransacking the attics and closets of the dead for scraps of clothing, daring to plant a few crops in areas where they'll grow with little care. And after that, boredom. He thrust an accusing finger at Peccary. You dared to use the slogan, "Time to achieve perfection." I tell you, Dr. Peccary, the source of man's courage and energy is the knowledge of death. Man was meant to be mortal. We strive because we know the time is short. We climb mountains, make love, descend to the depths of the sea, and reach for the stars, because the certainty of death urges us on. It's the only certainty the world had, and you would destroy it.
Peccary quailed before the bearded man's ferocity. He was relieved when his captor's attention was diverted by a party of horsemen who rode up in neat order and stopped before their leader. Several horses were loaded with explosives.
"Ready, sir,"
the spokesman said.
Good,
said the bearded man.
I see no reason to delay an instant.
An extra horse had been provided for Dr. Peccary. He was on the point of being forcibly hoisted into the saddle when he was given a reprieve by a diversion of another kind. Approaching on the path through the center of the canyon, pedaling his bicycle frantically, came Staghorn. He rode up to the group and leapt from his seat, his face blue from exertion. He'd been climbing all the way from town. He stood gasping for breath while he dragged his big gold watch from his pocket and consulted the time. He managed to groan.
"Only 30 minutes left. Miles to go. But it's downhill all the way. We can make it."
He shoved his bicycle forward.
"On the handlebars, Dr. Peccary. Quick!"
Peccary would have liked nothing better, but his movement towards Staghorn was stopped instantly by the men who were trying to put him on his horse.
"They're going to kill me," he cried. "They're going to blow up my factory and kill me."
"No, no," said Staghorn. "That can't be. The consequences would be disastrous."
He turned to the bearded leader.
"Look, sir, I have no time to explain, and I'm sure you wouldn't believe me even if I did. All of you are illusions. This entire situation is nothing but a mathematical probability, and so I insist that you release my friend, Dr. Peccary, at once."
The bearded man was so amazed by this request that he forgot to take offense. He gaped at Staghorn.
Who are you? I can't imagine an immortal risking himself on a bicycle.
"At this moment I'm desperately mortal, and so is Dr. Peccary."
Nonsense. Dr. Peccary is 142 years old.
"I've told you this situation has no existence in reality."
The bearded man stumped the ground.
I've been living on this planet 55 years. I know reality when I see it. And what's more, I'm beginning to think you are one of the Immortals. Even an immortal might show some courage when he knows he's going to be deprived of the Y hormone.
"You must know, I'm Dr. Roger Staghorn. I can see that there's industry and education in this canyon, and so it's possible you've heard of me. I have quite a record of scientific achievements back in the 20th century.
At this announcement, the bearded man goggled at him, then threw back his head and laughed uproariously.
You can't have picked a worse masquerade. Dr. Roger Staghorn died in 1994.
I can't help that I'm Staghorn. The bearded man stopped laughing and thrust his face forward threateningly.
You're a fraud, because it so happens that I'm Staghorn.
You, Staghorn?
I'm Henry Staghorn, great-grandson of the real Dr. Roger Staghorn.
Impossible. I've no intention of ever getting married.
Dr. Roger Staghorn married when he founded the Atavars 90 years ago. He saw the need of leaving mortal offspring and sacrificed himself to that end, and he's buried in the cliff over there. Furthermore, he became Dr. Peccary's most bitter enemy. If he were alive today, he'd be tying a knot for Peccary's neck instead of trying to rescue him.
The bearded man drew a revolver from inside his jacket.
I think I'll execute you here and now.
Peccary all but fainted. If Staghorn were killed, all hope was gone. But Staghorn threw up a commanding hand. Stop, Henry. What you say may be perfectly true from your peculiar viewpoint, but I'm still Roger Staghorn. Are you going to shoot your own great-grandfather? Staghorn's tone, rather than his words, made the bearded man pause. He turned to a companion. And in that instant, Staghorn moved. After all, he was slightly younger and more agile than his great-grandson. He leapt onto his bicycle, shouting at Peccary. Turn around! Peccary whirled and sprang in the air as Staghorn aimed the bicycle between his legs. He landed neatly on the handlebars and with simultaneous kicks sent the men on either side sprawling. Then he and Staghorn were off down the canyon. Behind them they could hear the thundering hooves as the horsemen started in pursuit.
Go, Staghorn, go!
Peccary shouted. The race would have been lost at once except for the downhill grade, but because of it, Peccary's added weight was a help instead of a hindrance. Shots rang out. Bullets bounced from the rocks on either side. They made it out of the canyon's mouth, and the grade increased on the long straightaway toward town. Staghorn's feet spun as they darted downward, maintaining their lead in front of the pursuing horsemen. The town loomed ahead of them, closer and closer, until at last they sped into a street where the buildings gave them protection from bullets. The bicycle slowed. They were on level ground again. Staghorn skidded around a corner and stopped so suddenly that Dr. Peccary was propelled forward and landed on his feet at the mouth of an alley. Abandoning the bicycle, both men charged into it. The square, Staghorn gasped. I'm focused on the square. He hauled out his watch as he ran. Only 7 minutes remained. The deep-throated alarm whistle was sounding over the town. Its inhabitants must have sighted the approach of the Atavars, for they were scurrying into buildings and basements, leaving the way clear for Peccary and Staghorn. They emerged from the alley and turned left for a block, then doubled back as they were sighted by the searching horsemen. The hue and cry was on again, but Peccary's familiarity with his hometown served them well until they came within sight of the square. Then they stopped in dismay and ducked into a doorway. Across the street in the centre of the little park, as though divining that it must be their destination, was Staghorn's great-grandson and 3 of his men. Their position enabled them to watch all 4 approaches to the square at the same time. Staghorn tugged out his watch again. 2 minutes. They had to be in focus. A second late, and they'd be locked forever. He watched the second hand creep around the dial. We have to chance it, he said. When I start running, run with me. The second hand crept on. A minute left. Staghorn judged the distance from their hiding place to the grassy plot where the bearded man was standing. About 75 yards. Could he do 75 yards in 10 seconds? Could Peccary? 30 seconds left. 25, 20. He'd never gone through such a painful countdown. 15 seconds. Ready, Dr. Peccary. It's now or never. 13, 12, 11. Go. Staghorn burst from his hiding place with Peccary at his heels. They dashed for the square. They were over the curb and into the street before the men in the park saw their approach and let out cries of triumph. Dip and weave, Dr. Peccary. Dip and weave. They dipped and wove while bullets ripped at their clothing. They were running right into the fire, making better targets at every stride. Staghorn ran with his watch in his hand, and never had time and distance diminished so slowly. 7 seconds. 6. 5. And they were still alive and across the street. 4 seconds. 3. 2. They were over the park and onto the grass. A bullet crashed into Staghorn's leg, and he fell, diving forward.
Got him!
Cried his great-grandson.
Now get Peccary!
3 shots rang out as one, but at some point in the bullet's flight toward Peccary and Staghorn, the square and everything in it vanished. Staghorn found himself sitting in Humanite's transmitter unit. The time clock had functioned. He was disengaged. He lifted the helmet from his head and stumbled from the cell, drawing a trouser leg up to examine his leg. It seemed that he could detect a scar. Then he turned and helped Dr. Peccary from the other transmitter. Both men stepped toward the console to look at Humanac's screen. It was still focused on the little park. The bearded man and his companions were now exchanging glances of consternation. After a moment, the bearded man wet his lips.
"Maybe he was right,"
he said in awed tones.
"No one but my great-grandfather could ever do a trick like that. And maybe what he said is true. It's an illusion. We're nothing but mathematical probabilities."
At this point, Staghorn hauled down the master switch. The screen went dead as Humanac's power was shut off. Some 20 minutes later, he had finished draining Dr. Peccary's sample of the Y hormone from Humanac's analyzer and had thoroughly cleansed the computer of any last traces of it. He handed the little bottle of the hormone back to Dr. Peccary. "There," he said. "As far as Humanac is concerned, it's as though it never was. Do as you wish." Dr. Peccary looked at the bottle sadly. It was worth millions, billions. Then slowly he moved to the laboratory sink and poured the contents of the bottle down the drain. "I can't help wondering," mused Staghorn, "of whose computer we're a part of right now. Slight factors in the chain of causation that started God knows when and will end when someone pulls the switch," said Dr. Peccary. End of Track 25. Track 26.
"More scientists do science in space."
It reads Sci-fi, Volume 11. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Story 12.
Total Recall
By Larry Sternig. The face of Brian Vaughan, chief of the Solar Bureau of Investigation, was grey with strain and fatigue.
"This Corvo North business," he said. "It's almost a myth by now, but it's our only chance. We might as well face that."
His features and that of the younger man across the desk from him might have formed a study in contrasts. Roger Kay was keen, alert. There were signs of weariness about his eyes, but the firm set of his jaw revealed a tendency to action rather than introspection. "Then, sir," he urged, "let's take that chance. The department has located him, I believe. I haven't seen the reports." The SBI chief nodded.
"His laboratory is right here on Ganny."
He indicated a spot on the global map of Ganymede, some distance from the spaceport. "That's the mining district," Kay observed.
"Yes, he's been doing some research for the Interplanetary Mining Syndicate. We've assigned a special wave band and are in constant communication. Here, I'll introduce you."
Vaughan set the dials on the Visi communicator that occupied one corner of his desk, then looked up at the screen on the wall. A blurred rectangle of light flickered, and then coalesced into sharpness, and Roger Kay involuntarily drew a deep breath. The girl looking out from the Visi screen was the most beautiful he'd ever seen.
"Is your father making progress, Miss North?"
asked Vaughan. The girl in the screen shook her head. "I'm afraid not, Mr. Vaughan. He is in the lab now, working, and won't let me disturb him except to bring in coffee and sandwiches. I've been trying to get him to sleep."
"This is Roger Kay, Miss North," said the SBI chief. "One of my assistants. I'm sending him out to your place to see if he can help."
And North frowned slightly. "We're doing everything we possibly can already."
"I'm sure of that. But Mr. Kay is rather outstanding as a scientist himself, Miss North. He'll be able to help, at least in some of the detail work, to save time."
Roger Kay grinned. "He means, Miss North, that I can clean the test tubes and solder the wires, and let your father save his energy for the brain work." His smile was infectious, and the scientist's daughter capitulated. Vaughan flicked the switch and threw the screen into blankness.
"I'll give you an order for the fastest helio we have," he said. "We'll be there in 3 hours, and that means there'll be a little less than 3 days left."
Roger Kay drew a deep breath, his face suddenly serious. 3 days to save the system from an invasion that could not possibly prove to be less than a major catastrophe, less than the end of things as he knew them. Even now the invaders from Andromeda were approaching the system's outermost defenses, converging upon the virtually helpless garrisons on Pluto. Patrol spacers off the frigid planet had already contacted spearheads of the huge armada, with fatal results. Once before, the system had been perilled by these devils from the distant galaxy. Victory had been costly then, but the combined planetary fleets could not now hope to stave off the full force on this new attack. They would have to yield space, fall back to more favorable positions. Trionite alone would prove the decisive factor in any war of worlds, and the United Planets had not been able to learn the secret of manufacturing the new explosive, 1 ton of which could wreck an invading army. As Roger K set the robot course dial of his speedy helio for the mining settlement, he switched in for a moment on Vargan's private waveband. "Leaving now, sir," he reported crisply. "Be there in 2 hours. Any further instructions?"
"Do your best, Kay. That's all," came the weary voice of the SBI chief. "New reports in confirm the old ones. We expect the first blow by noon Friday. Pluto is doomed. Now being evacuated."
"We've got to stop them," Roger said fiercely as he snapped the switch. "We've just got to." He settled back to getting much-needed 2 hours of sleep while the robot pilot held his course. The alarm bell awakened him, and he pointed the craft down under the great red disk of Big Jupe, toward the low range of purple cliffs indicated on his map. A few minutes later, he was knocking at the door of the dome-shaped laboratory. Anne North was twice as beautiful in the flesh as she had seemed on the visi-screen. Attired in the modish shorts and tunic that had become universal garb for Earthwomen, she looked like a figure from a Grecian frieze. She led him to the library. "Dared to sleep at last," she said. "I persuaded him to rest for a few hours, on the strength of my argument that he'd accomplish more in the long run if he kept his brain clear." Roger K nodded understandingly. "I just had a bit of sleep myself on Rat. Nobody at headquarters has slept much the last few days. By the way, I'm woefully in the dark about a lot of things. Will you tell me just what your father's trying to rediscover? If you can enlighten me, I'll not have to ask him so many darn full questions." "You know, of course," said Anne North, when they were comfortably seated, "that it's a ray that would explode any explosive at a distance. Or perhaps I shouldn't have said a ray. It's really a sound wave in the ultrasonic belt, traveling on a beam. It disrupts any unstable chemical compound." Roger K nodded. "That much I know. I've examined one of the projectors. We've installed them all at the outposts. They're all ready except for the catalyst, the part of the discovery that's lost in the chemical compound that produces the catalytic gas. The ultrasonic waves passing through the gas change their vibration in some way." "I see now," said Kay. "Why, it's directional. The ultrasonic waves go in all directions, of course, but only those passing through the gas are disruptive, right?" The girl nodded her beautiful blonde head. "It's all very simple, and it's all in the hands of the government, except for the formula for that catalyst. Fortunately, my father has a reputation as a scientist. That's why the government was willing to take a chance on having those projectors set up, even though—" Roger K smiled wryly. "Your father is the outstanding scientist of the system, Miss North. But even if he wasn't, we might have taken that chance. It's about the only chance. If he fell 3 days from now—" "As bad as that?" "I'm afraid so. But let's not talk about it. One thing I don't know. How was the formula lost?" "Dad destroyed it. He discovered it accidentally 20 years ago while working on something else. Never thinking that the fate of worlds might hinge upon it, he destroyed his notes almost as soon as he had made them. He's always been awfully opposed to war, you know, and he saw the terrible possibilities in the weapon if it should fall into the wrong hands."
"That is still true," said a quiet voice from the doorway.
Roger K recognized Corvo North at once, from the many photographs he had seen. He rose and offered his hand.
"I'm glad you're here, Mr. K," said the scientist. "Anne told me you were coming. Yes, it's still true that I'm opposed to war, but this isn't war. Even disregarding personal interests and patriotism, it's an attempt to save the human race. Come on into the laboratory. We've no time to waste."
Roger whistled softly under his breath as Corvo North closed the door behind them. The laboratory, spacious and well-equipped, was a research worker's dream. The scientist led the way past rows of pieces of apparatus, whose purpose Roger could but dimly guess, to a table at the far end of the room. Upon the table was a small box, bristling with dials. The back and top were open, showing a maze of wires and coils and condensers. "Looks like a radio set with hydrophobia," Roger observed. "What connection is this with the catalyst formula?"
"Nothing directly. There's no chance, through experimentation, of my recovering that formula in time. 3 years, possibly. 3 days, never."
"You mean that it's hopeless to try? That the system is lost?" Roger Kay was appalled.
"I don't quite mean that," said North, "but what chance there is lies through this apparatus you're looking at now. Sit down. I'll explain while I work. You can help later when I've explained the machine."
He began to tinker amidst the maze of wires.
"My discovery of trinite was purely accidental. It was empiric, not based on any theory. There were 6 or 7 chemicals, and I recall the identity of only 2 of them. The others? Well, count the chemicals in the pharmacopoeia. The only way I could rediscover it would be by accident, as I did before, and that would involve too many experiments and too much time. But the formula is buried somewhere in my subconscious mind. I might remember it."
Roger Kay eyed the box with some misgivings. "You mean this is—"
"The memory of everything we've ever done or seen is latent in our minds, in the molecular structure of the brain. Almost, I might say, in concentric layers. When the present crisis arose, I had been studying the human brain and the nature of thought and memory. Do you follow me?"
He looked up from his work, and as Roger nodded, he saw how haggard and weary was the face of the elderly scientist.
"Consciousness is basically electrical in nature. The act of memory is the shift of that electrical impulse back to a buried stratum of the brain. But the shift is never complete. Most of the consciousness stays in the present. We never remember anything perfectly.
Then this machine is to
create a magnetic field of such nature as to shift the consciousness as a whole. By shifting the magnetic field's intensity, I can move back the consciousness or memory to complete remembrance of any given moment of the past. In other words, under its influence, I hope to send back my memory to the moment when I jotted down the formula. Earlier or later won't do. I didn't memorize it at any time."
His interest completely gripped. Roger Kay stared into the intricate mechanism. "But, sir," he asked, "do you know the exact time that was down to the minute?"
"Fortunately, yes. I recall that it was the day Anne was being given a party for her 3rd birthday. My wife had told me to be home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I was a little late, didn't leave the lab until on the stroke of 3, and it was 2 or 3 minutes before then that I wrote down the formula."
"And you think you can hit that exact moment?"
"With a couple of preliminary experiments, yes. If I find that given setting of the dial and the vernier adjustments give me a certain date and time of day, I can calculate the proper adjustment for the time I want."
"Amazing!" exclaimed Roger. "Frankly, if I weren't for the wonderful things you've accomplished in other fields, I'd say it was visionary."
Corporal North shook his grey head. "The theory is sound. It should work. But 3 days. Man, we're working against a deadly deadline." He grabbed a pad and pencil. "Here, I'll show you what to do, and you can start on the headpiece that connects to the machine here."
And thus started the busiest, dizziest hours of Roger Kay's life. Sleep was a chimera that haunted every leaden-eyed hour,
a mirage that beckoned and pleaded in vain,
and the hands of the laboratory clock crept inexorably onward. At 3 in the morning on Friday, Terran time, with 9 hours left before the invaders would strike, Kay staggered to the televis and dialed Vargan. "I think we'll finish in time," he reported. "We'll be ready for the first test in a couple of hours. Have you made the preparations we suggested?"
The SBI chief nodded. "At the base of each projector we've installed practically a chemical warehouse. There is at least a small quantity of every available known chemical, and expert chemists waiting at each."
"Good. Then within 15 minutes after I send you the formula, the projectors can be in operation."
10 minutes, unless the formula is more complex than you believe. You say that Corporal North believes there are but 6 or 7 ingredients."
Roger Kay nodded wearily. "And the communications?"
"Open constantly. An operator on duty at each projector at all times. Test messages going through every 15 minutes. Incidentally, latest reports still confirm early ones. The deadline is still noon today."
Roger Kay saluted, then snapped the switch. Back to work at the little box in the laboratory. During those last hours, as well as the ones preceding them, Anne North had been a ministering angel. Sleeping almost as little as the two men, she was ever ready with encouragement and hot coffee. At times, almost by force, she would pry one or the other of them away from their work for a brief period of rest. On her own initiative, she had called in Dr. Dane. Once he understood the situation, the doctor was invaluable. He took no part in the work on the machine, but he watched over Corvo North constantly and kept him at the highest point of efficiency under the circumstances. 10 o'clock came, and 10:30, and they were ready for the preliminary test. As he placed the metal plates on his head with shaking hands, Corvo North seemed a mere shell of his former self. Roger Kay sat at the controls. At North's instructions, they ran the wires to an easy chair several yards away, as they were uncertain just how far the magnetic field would extend beyond the headset.
"Better tie me to the chair," North cautioned. "When the field is thrown on, I'll have no recollection of the present, or why I'm here. Don't forget that. Until you bring me back by setting the dials to 0, mentally, I'll be back where I was whatever time we hit upon. It'll seem to me that I'm waking suddenly in utterly strange circumstances and surroundings. You know what questions to ask, of course."
"Yes, Mr. North," said Roger. He turned to Dr. Dane. "Will you attend to the tying, just sufficiently so that he can't rise in his bewilderment?" And North brought straps, and a few moments later Corvo North nodded that he was ready, then leaned his head back and closed his eyes. Roger Kay glanced at the instruments and then shifted 2 of the dials. There was a sudden hum from within the box, and Corvo North's eyes snapped open.
What is this?" he demanded. "Why am I here?"
"Everything's all right, Mr. North," said Roger soothingly. "We'll release you in a moment. First, please tell us what is the date."
"It's January 12th, of course. Why do you—"
"And the year."
2045. Now will you kindly—
Just one more question, Mr. North. Do you know the exact time of day when you awoke here?"
"How can I when I don't know how I got here? Last thing I remember was walking through the door of the bank to get my appointment at 9. What happened? What, did I faint?"
A glow of satisfaction lodged itself in Roger's mind. They were getting the time more accurately than he dared expect on the first trial. He pushed his luck a bit farther. "Were you on time to make that appointment, Mr. North?"
"I'd have been 5 minutes early. Now will you—"
"Perfect," exclaimed Roger. He turned back the dials. Corvo North went limp for an instant, then reopened his eyes. Dr. Dane rushed to him and unbuckled the straps.
"Get anything?"
asked the scientist weakly. "Perfect," said Roger again. "I've got a note of the exact setting, and you were able to give the time exactly." He scribbled hasty calculations on the pad. "And that setting took you back to January of 2045, to be exact, 6,728 days, 27 hours, 7 minutes. Corvo North nodded weakly, but excitedly tried to rise. Dr. Dane, his hand on North's pulse, motioned him back.
"That was a tremendous strain on your heart, North," he cautioned. "I forbid you to do it again until you've rested."
"Absurd." Corvo North glanced at the clock. "There isn't time. It's 11 now."
"Repeat that again right away, and you'll never live to report what you see," warned the physician solemnly. "Half an hour of rest, or the entire experiment will be in vain."
Anne North's face was pale. She looked from her father to Roger Kay pleadingly. He nodded slowly. "We can just do it. I'll check and recheck the calculations meanwhile. Get the dial settings exact. And the next try, well, it's make or break anyway." His voice was grim. "One more chance, and we get it. Or we don't." During that half hour he checked and counterchecked his figures until he was as sure as possible to hit the exact instant in the past, the instant when Corvo North had jotted down the lost formula. At 11:30 the headset was replaced on Corvo North's head. This time his arms were left free, and a pad of paper placed on his lap. His fingers held a pencil. He leaned back and again closed his eyes. Roger Kay turned the dials. Corvo North's face tensed, then relaxed. His eyes remained closed. For a half-minute, aside from the faint hum from the machine, there was utter, stark silence in the laboratory. It was maddening. Then a faint scratching sound. The others, holding their breath from sheer suspense, saw the pencil in Corvo North's hand begin to move across the pad. 3 lines it wrote. Stopped. The formula. Suddenly the scientist's eyes snapped open, widened with terror and bewilderment. With a movement so swift that no one could stop him, he ripped the sheet of paper from the pad, crumpled it, and hurled it into the glowing coil of an electric heater. The paper flashed into flame, crumpled into ash as Corporal North himself crumpled, went limp in the chair. Roger Kay turned the dials back to 0 as Anne and the doctor leaped forward, unstrapped the unconscious scientist. Dr. Dane felt the fluttering pulse and picked up the frail body and headed for the living quarters. Anne, her blue eyes wide with anxiety, ran ahead to open doors and prepare for the doctor's ministrations. When she returned, Roger Kay stood before the visi-screen. Anne put a hand on his shoulder. "Dad will be all right," she said, her voice flat with despair. "But we failed. Dr. Dane says it'll be days before he'd dare—" "Shh," said Roger gently. "Watch." He slipped his left arm around her slim waist, drew her toward the screen. The vista past the purple range showed at once that the view was eastward from the spaceport. There was no shipping in sight. In the red sky, far out and very high, was a thin, silvery line. "The invaders." Unconsciously, Roger Kay whispered, rather than spoke. 1,000 spheres, at least for us alone. Watch, in a moment we'll know. "Know what, Roger? Do you mean—" The visi-screen answered for him. Out there, high up in the sky, there was a single bright flash, and then 1,000 flashes that blended into one blinding one. A roar from the receiver rose to deafening pitch, stopped abruptly. "Shattered the diaphragm of the transmitter," said Roger quietly. "That was trionite in action, Anne. It's all over. Your father won." "But the formula. He destroyed it." Roger Kay put his other arm about her, smiled down. "That was why I was sent here, Anne, to eliminate possible hitches." "But how?" "Your father destroyed the formula the first time, and I guessed he might do it again. In his mind he was back some 20 years ago, remember? So I took the elementary precaution of placing carbon paper between the third and fourth sheets of that pad of paper, and I sent Vaughan the formula while you were with your father 12 minutes ago." End of track 26.
End of More Scientists Do Science in Space.
Ed reads Sci-fi, Volume 11.